Man,
Hey everybody, welcome to A Thunderous Applause, a
you're
podcast where two
paused.
friends. What?
You're paused. Go.
Hey everybody, welcome to A Thunderous Applause, a podcast where two friends get together, talk about the ideas and events that will shape our uncertain future. Even though we mostly talk about politics, politics is central to Star Wars, which is a shared passion of ours. And so today we are going to dedicate our Monday stream to talking about the upcoming show, The Acolyte, by showrunner, director, and writer Leslie Headland. And the story of that is set in the High Republic era, which is a new era that Disney's developed, although I think some properties, novels and stuff kind of reached back a little further, like the I think, well-known or well-received Plagius novel is set in that period, or maybe not. I don't know. We're going to learn about the High Republic era because I know very little, and then we're going to talk about the Acolyte, which I highly encourage people. And Zach, you tell me, did you have a chance to just kind of scroll YouTube, looking at information for the Acolyte or Leslie Headland?
I didn't focus so much on the writer. I never do. I'm gonna put this out on the internet right now. I don't give a shit who writes it. I don't give a shit who directs it. I care about the actors and the stuff that is portrayed on the screen. Kudos to you who put in the effort without me caring about you. I love you indirectly.
Well, I mean, but those people matter, right? Because that's how you get a fucking show like Kenobi.
No, I find
It's absolute garbage. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. The last three words were absolute garbage. Made all
What were
the
you going to
difference.
say?
Oh no, that made all the difference to what you were going to say. I was going to say, wow, if you reference Kenobi, I'm like, cool. That's even less reason to care about writers because
No, but yeah, that's what I mean. Like writing, directing, storytelling, all these people behind the scenes. And I think it does matter. And I think Andor is all we really, as far as we need to look into how much that fucking matters. Like Robert Rodriguez, did movies with like Danny Trejo and Selma Hayek and shit, right?
Right.
And like did some crossover stuff with Tarantino and all this stuff. And he was not a good writer or a showrunner. It was Book of Boba Fett was a fucking hot mess.
Yeah, because it was mostly other shows. And I wonder, is that their fault? Because I was just thinking, like, how much is the fault of the director and how much is the fault of the editors and producers?
Well, the showrunner and the producers should be the people, the buck stops with them ultimately, because they're responsible for producing the show.
Right.
They hire writers, and I am not an expert on the film industry, but I think I understand how it works well enough.
Well, something that happens with Marvel products that I'm worried might creep its way into Star Wars is that they try to keep as much of the story from the actors as they can, which is kind of antithetical to acting. If you don't know what's going on, it's hard to behave in an appropriate fashion.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say Mark Hamill himself said that he didn't know that Darth Vader was his father until they were fucking filming.
Oh,
filming that scene.
Oh, where he's like,
where he says, "I am your father." They told him right before they started doing takes.
Oh, that's great. Well,
yeah,
okay,
I mean,
okay. So it's a long history of keeping actors in the dark.
Well, I think that it depends, right? I think with Marvel and stuff, it's because they don't want leaks. And as we've discussed kind of tangentially before, I don't understand the obsession about like keeping the super tight lid on what's happening, because if we generally kind of know what's happening.
I've actually seen some videos that have said that knowing a little bit of the story going into it actually helps you enjoy it more. And you can kind of see that in human history where people knew what was going to happen to the historical figures well before they got to it in a formal environment. Like, parents would tell their children about Hercules and whatnot, and then they go see it in public and they're like, that's Hercules, that's the guy I know. Like, we all can enjoy it almost more because we understand what is about to happen.
Right. And so there's not a lot known about this show, The Acolyte, except that it takes place in the High Republic.
Right.
It's going to be kind of a mystery thriller. And there's an article here that we'll go over in a bit where Headland, the showrunner and primary writer, I guess you could say lead writer, because she does have a team. And unfortunately, we didn't get anything to discuss the other writers brought in on the project, but I will refer to them in a bit later. But like, we do know that it's kind of like Frozen meets Kill Bill, and we'll discuss that a little bit because I think that's fascinating.
It's fucking great.
And then we also know that Headland says that it, as far as it relates to Kill Bill, it's going to be a martial arts movie, or a show. It's going to be heavily into martial arts, and what little they showed at Star Wars Celebration shows a considerable use of force powers during lightsaber battles, which I thought was really fucking rad because they missed that opportunity.
Up until now, it was just like, bah, 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 bah. Let me shove you back with the force.
Yeah. And this guy Darth, who's I kind of like a lot. He does some kind of like long form analysis videos. Just released his 3-hour and 15-minute fucking video on Kylo Ren yesterday. It was just like, speaking of lightsaber fights, it's like, wow, he like literally stopped a laser bolt with the force, and he's having this like lightsaber battle and just forgets to use the force the whole fucking time.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and that is earlier in the Force Awakens, he fucking basically immobilized Rey with the force, and like he's fighting her with a lightsaber when he can literally just immobilize her and stab her, or wave his hand and make her pass out.
Right. Yeah.
It's the force roofie, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, I made that joke because there's a lot of really like rapey stuff between them.
Oh, absolutely.
Which does not get criticized enough. And I know that I've mentioned before how we watching Attack of the Clones with the kids, we like stopped and we're like, this isn't okay. The way he's talking to her and the way that she's like kind of pushing back, and he's not respecting boundaries, not okay.
Nice.
So the prequels had some rapey shit in it too.
Yeah.
Plus the whole kind of Freudian where like he obsesses over saving Padme and turns to the dark side because like he's mad about his mom. So Padme is kind of like a sexual fitted for his mom. Yeah, it's fucking weird, but whatever. That's George Lucas.
Yeah. He's a freak.
He's a weird dude, but he's cool. At any rate, where was I? The Acolyte is going to be an interesting show, so we'd like to talk about that now.
Yes, absolutely. And so what we have is
Force,
an introduction, kind of
Crouching Wookiee.
It's Star Wars Eclipse, but it really is the idea of the Star Wars High Republic in video game form, and so it's pretty decent.
Oh, okay, so this is a game trailer.
Yeah.
It kind of summarizes the High Republic.
No, it's not the trailer. It's someone reviewing the trailer because we respect our reviewers.
The simple explanation is that it's the golden era of both the Republic and the Jedi Order. They're both pretty much the best, most idealized versions of themselves. The Jedi are widely seen as respected heroes who help without a second thought. Compare that to the Clone Wars era Jedi, who were much slower to act and were regarded as out of touch with the rest of the galaxy.
So much of their time was spent doing something along these lines. Should we?
Jedi like Qui-Gon Jinn, Anakin Skywalker, and Ahsoka Tano were kind of outliers at that point in the timeline. The Jedi are also far more flexible during the High Republic, whether it came to the Jedi Code or attachments or their views on the Force itself. There's just more variety during the High Republic.
I like this right here. That is like a main gauche style weapon. You're trying to catch someone's saber between it and flick it out. Like, that is such expertise.
Disarm them.
Yeah. That is such expertise. At that point, you're like, my whole style is built upon meh. You know?
Yeah, and I also just kind of like, it makes sense, right? The High Republic, there's a lot of Jedi.
Who is
In
this?
fact, there's
also
a lot of Jedi until the Battle of Geonosis, because like something like over 1,000 Jedi die in that one battle.
Oh yeah. So I think some noticeable things is this guy right here. Who is he? His lightsaber's just hanging. He's fucking chill. He doesn't want to fight anybody. And then this person.
Oh, he's levitating his saber.
No, he's not. Oh, he is. Oh, that's his hand. Okay. Yeah, he's just levitating it, but it's not activated. So it's like, is this person all about, passive peace? Or he's like, hey, you could go against me, but shit would go sour real quick. Look at what I'm doing. And then this person over here with the dark saber, are they a predecessor to the Mandalorian dark saber? Is it a completely different weapon? It doesn't look like the Mandalorian dark saber.
It's a fascinating hilt, though.
Oh, it looks almost organic. It's super long. It thins out right there. Yeah. And there's all kinds of crystals in it. You don't see, at least it looks like
stuff. It might be cultural, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like that one episode of the Clone Wars when they're making lightsabers and what's his name? The young Wookiee.
Lobaka, was it?
No, it wasn't Lobaka. It was I forget his name. Gunji, the Wookiee Padawan.
Yeah.
And they were making lightsabers, and he made his out of like a particularly like super hard
the type of wood. Yeah.
Common. They have that Wookiees have traditionally made weapon hilts, tools, and stuff out of this really, really hard wood. And so that was kind of like there's like a kind of cultural aspect to the weapon that you craft, even though it's a lightsaber, right? You like it embodies who you are and where you come from. So that's probably what that is right there.
Right. Nonetheless, I like it. And everybody else is kind of plain. You have these people that appear to be twins, perhaps. I don't know.
Zabraks, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. I haven't read through the whole series, so.
Yeah, let's finish up these videos and then we can have a quick discussion about the High Republic.
We see a lot more roles that the Jedi could take on, like investigators or healers or wayseekers who operated outside of the Jedi Council and simply followed the Force however it led them. Philosophically and visually, the Jedi of the High Republic were more varied. As for the Republic, it has largely known nothing but peace for about 800 years. The books and comics all take place about 200 years before the events of the Phantom Menace, which itself took place 1,000 years after the end of the Sith Wars. Sure, little conflicts would pop up here and there, but no galaxy-spanning war like the Sith, Clone, or Galactic Civil Wars. This has allowed the Republic to expand. Large sections of the Outer Rim are still uncharted or independent. Under the leadership of Chancellor Lina So, the Republic is working to expand its borders by taking an active interest in improving the lives of the citizens of the Outer Rim, which is definitely an oddity for governments in Star Wars. The Republic of the Clone Wars era, the Empire, and even the New Republic mostly left the Outer Rim to its own devices, either through apathy or necessity. But in the High Republic, Lina So works to make life better for those in the frontier regions. Jedi outposts are installed on several planets to better aid anyone who needs help, and the space station Starlight Beacon is placed in the Outer Rim to improve diplomatic relations and communications. All in all, it's an era of peace, growth, and community.
Yeah, so I actually had an entire RPG game based upon the idea of, far rim or a completely unexplored space and dealing with that. And if you're ever playing, RPGs and you don't want to stick to the main rules of the game, just head to the outskirts, man. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, and so a couple things about that. I like he mentioned, they have varied jobs. The thing is that the films only kind of show you
the warriors, really.
The warriors, yeah, they don't, and that's kind of a problem generally, right? Like the great man theory of history. That you only hear about the military exploits. You don't hear about all the other people that are doing things.
The guy who first discovered like plant seed in ground, get same plant, like super important guy.
And speaking of which, in the expanded universe, and I don't believe it's been explored in canon whatsoever, but in the expanded universe, if you had Force sensitivity, but were not exhibiting like a particular acuity for it, like or a strength in it, or a natural ability for it, then you would go into like the agricultural corps, which technically were still run by the Jedi Order, but it was a more of part of their diplomatic arm rather than their warfare arm.
Right?
They weren't sending them to resolve conflicts per se, but they were sending them, and that sounds like High Republic territory, really, right? Like they're trying to expand Republic is trying to expand its influence. What better way to do that than to like provide
Agriculture.
expertise
Yeah.
and guidance in particular like realms of economic development and
Well,
well-being, right?
raise people up from like, merely survival to thrival. Why isn't thrival a word?
Thrival's a word I use all the time, actually.
Thrival? Is
I
it an
do.
actual word?
No.
Okay, yeah, but I like it makes sense to me, like raising people from survival to thrival. Like you want to get away from just getting by day to day to actually like improving yourself. I had to explain to a professor in the past, like the only way that math has ever existed is because we had fucking excess time for people to just sit there and be like, hmm, like you don't have that moment, without a little bit of extra time because someone is well fed without having to, bust their ass to get it.
Yeah, without having to recruit. But that, yeah, specialization, division of labor, all those things
Yes.
came out of having some kind of caloric surplus,
Yeah.
right? So, I
Well,
mean,
that's super interesting. Both the banks I've worked for in the past have avoided specialization in favor of generalization. And I've had to like tell so many people I work for, like, specialization is the only reason we're where we are. You're trying to make everyone a generalist. We're going to fail as a bank if you want to make everyone a generalist. Like, hyper
right.
focus, make sure you replace people in time.
The person who specialized in like having a relationship with and learning how to work with like oxen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It takes a lot of time to do that.
They're
You're not going to
dangerous
be able to
animals.
be an expert at working with oxen and an expert at crafting yokes,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so a craftsman makes the yoke, works with the guy, and
He
probably
gets
there's
feedback.
communication
There's
between it. Like,
feedback for sure.
yeah, hey, these oxen have a narrower shoulder width. We
It's
need to
chafing
modify it.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
however, but there's communication between specialists and then people can actually focus and become experts on something, which go ahead.
I was gonna say, I gotta say, as someone who's like involved in kind of like superfluous businesses, because banking fucking doesn't matter. That's not, you don't need banking to survive. It's just there because it is. But that sort of thing kind of leads away from what you're talking about, where you don't get the feedback. Like I've worked at banks and had a problem with the software providers. They don't give me a means to communicate to them and say, like, hey, I'm trying to do this. I can't accomplish this. How can we accomplish this? Like, you have to dig so hard. There's no, like, most websites that you go to as a normal, human being, there's a feedback. There's a, how are we doing area to get your feedback.
Which
These companies don't give it to you. Go ahead.
ultimately probably goes nowhere.
Yeah, yeah. And that has been my experience. Very infrequently have I gotten a response. The one time I did get a response, we completely changed the software. It became much more user friendly. And you know what extra I got paid for that? Dick all.
Yeah, of
I got
course not.
nothing.
Because they don't give a shit.
No.
But anyway, so I think it's interesting to have an era where there's a lot of Jedi and that there's this interesting thing. Like he said, they don't neglect the Outer Rim, right? Because they remember one of the
Yeah.
first things, Naboo, I think, is a mid-rim planet, right? Remember they were escaping.
Naboo, yes, it is outside the core because the core is riddled with just the deep core is riddled with black holes that are in the process of merging. The core is rife with planets inexplicably. Like there's a high radioactivity regime in any galaxy's core, so they must be in a quiescent period where the central black core is not doing much. We're actually kind of in that period right now. And so it's really interesting seeing the Star Wars galaxy evolve and knowing that it's probably going to go towards being a more active central core, like relatively quickly, because everything moves in cycles just like it does on our planets.
Yeah, right. And I guess I wasn't really talking about astrophysics so much as like I was
Damn
thinking
you!
of Naboo being a mid-rim and in the Phantom Menace when Padme and the ship gets damaged and they have to stop on Tatooine, right?
Yeah.
Because every Star Wars movie has to have Tatooine in it for some reason. Or
It's sand.
Tatooine Light,
Jakku.
like Jakku. Yeah.
Jakku.
But at any rate, when Padme gets there, she's like, "What? They still have slavery here?" And then Qui-Gon's like, man, the Republic doesn't give a fuck about the Outer Rim, dude. Like,
I do like that he's just like, I don't give a shit about slavery, and that kind of makes you wonder, like, did Qui-Gon have a larger view of the galaxy, where he was like, yeah, slavery sucks. However, there's a bigger suck.
I think so. I think he's just more nuanced. He's just kind of like, eh. That was his whole approach to the Force. But we don't want to talk about Qui-Gon too much because he's not in the High Republic era.
That is an interesting thing to talk about, though. It may have been that he was just like, this is bad slavery. There's worse.
Oh, I'm sure the Spice Mines of Kessel or anybody indentured to like one of the cartels, like the Zergians or whatever, or I think that's what they're called.
Or literally anyone working for Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You're like, oh, you're a slave. Like, what? Well, you have like a house.
Yeah.
It's like
basically, you have privacy. You have privacy. That's major.
Right, exactly. And so, like, what do you do exactly? Like, oh, you go to Watto's shop and you dust the china? Like,
kind of look like it. Yeah.
It doesn't sound like that big of a job, right? Or like that oppressive of a situation. Of course, right? There's other aspects of it not having bodily autonomy, and blah blah. But if they wanted to show
we're all in similar situations, maybe they were trying to point out that we're all slaves and we just haven't recognized our cages yet.
I think that there's some truth to that. But how central to Anakin being a slave was to his like setup or foundation for turning to the dark side. They didn't really portray it as being that bad of a thing.
I mean, it
other
really
than the normal kind of moral reaction that is, oh, he's a slave. Slavery is bad. Right?
I mean, if you ultimately break it down, the thing that kind of made him go to the dark side was like, my mother wasn't fully protected and she ultimately died. And it's like, okay, cool. That could happen outside of slavery. Like that could happen in America. It could happen here.
She could be going to get fucking to a shopping mall or to a grocery store and get gunned down by some fucking lunatic.
Or fucking kidnapped or any number of things. Yeah. And so I think it really did kind of demonstrate, if you focus in, that slavery was not the problem. It was vulnerability and not having a society that, tries to protect us all.
I think in part there's a Zergian arc.
Zergian?
Isn't it Zergians?
The only thing I know about Zerg is StarCraft.
Okay, I think it's Zergian or something like that. They're one of the slaving empires. They're kind of like a criminal syndicate, like the Pikes or whatever, or Crimson Dawn or whatever. And there's an arc in the Clone Wars. And then Ahsoka is like, what the fuck is up with Anakin? Because he's like really like sending off like dark side energies.
Yeah.
And Obi-Wan has to tell Ahsoka, he's like, all this time you've known him, like all the things you've done together, it's never come up because he doesn't talk about it, but he was born a slave. And there's a particular hatred for slavers.
Of course, yeah.
It drove him to dark side stuff, but he also like seduced the fucking queen and some other shit. I don't know. It was an interesting arc. I liked it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, we're not talking about Anakin Skywalker, goddamn. We're talking about the High Republic and the Acolyte.
We're doing it. I'm just gonna go over and hit play.
Do it.
The main conflict of the High Republic in those books and comics so far is centered around a group called the Nihil. They're raiders in the Outer Rim who prefer to be independent. They fly from planet to planet and take what they want.
We take what we want and we prefer to have it that way. Well, of course they prefer to have it that way.
That kind of sounds like Vikings, right? Like, or at least the caricature of what we understand Vikings to be. Like,
yeah.
Or
Longhorns.
Or fucking God, House Greyjoy.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah.
In the Game of Thrones, like they're just like, we
literally have
that's what we do.
We have an island. It's made of iron. We can't grow crops. We take what we want.
Yeah, we just because we have coastal settlements.
We do what we want because we have to.
Exactly. Sorry, continue.
They prey on the weak. So the last thing they want is for the Republic, and therefore the Jedi, swooping in to stop them. Without going into spoilers, the Nihil viciously attack the Republic to make them think twice about their expansion, and they also unleash more than one type of mysterious, powerful creature on their enemies.
Strike back. to make them think twice. Now think about that, from the point of view of the Nile. They're like, oh, we have these borders, intruders, rebuff, them in one way or another. Oh, they came again, rebuff them harder. Like,
yeah.
If you think about things from the from the other our point of view, a lot of things seem completely rational. So take some time to be rational, everyone.
Yeah, no. And I think that that's a good statement that sets up our discussion of the Acolyte, because like there is kind of that. Well, like what about what about them, right?
Yeah.
They have a way of life, and here you coming in and establishing new rules. Like we would agree, right? If like all of a sudden we were taken over by like, let's say like
Let's
Bethel
go.
Church and
Let's
Handmaid's
go. Red
Tale
Dawn.
fucking Christian fascists and wanted to change all the rules. Like I think that we would probably be like, I don't know about that.
Not so much. Yeah,
we might have to bear arms and fight back.
Right? I mean, there have been movies made this way that aren't the Handmaid's Tale because people in this country want the Handmaid's Tale to be a thing.
Maybe.
Yeah, but I was thinking on this, and I was like, man, it really is interesting that you and I are of the age where we had the good versus evil conflicts when we were watching cartoons in the morning as kids.
Mm-hmm.
We had Transformers, G.I. Joe, and then it wasn't until you got to places like fucking, SpongeBob and Adventure Time that you finally had kind of like push back against the, very black and white world that was presented by early cartoons. And so it's good to see shows like Andor and what the Acolyte is shaping up to be, where there might not be a clear good and evil. There's just one point of view versus another point of view. Like, it's very fascinating to finally get to a point where we can be like honest and endorsed by Disney. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's really at the core of it. I think that like people like simple stories because humans are a storytelling species.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
humans appreciate.
Shit, there we go.
It's all good. At any rate, I think people like simple stories, but the reality is it's not like the world is never really like, the good rebels versus the evil Darth Vader and Empire, right? With their super weapon. But, I think it was in, is it the first or the second Clerks?
Yeah,
I think it was the first Clerks.
Please
there was a bit of dialogue about like the rebellion being the good guys. They what about the janitors, right? Like all these
contractors
just, like going to work to like pay their rent or whatever that just got obliterated. Like you killed millions of people.
Yeah. Well, like it was the size of a small moon. How many people are living there? Yeah.
And then you could say tit for tat, right? They destroyed Alderaan, which was billions or, tens or hundreds of millions or billions.
I have a feeling that Alderaan was almost kind of like a post-scarcity society that was like, we don't need to cram our entire planet with cities. Like from what we see of it, it doesn't look to be. It really doesn't look like it's been, jam-packed with high technology and stripped of resources. It appears as though they might have been first, since they are a diplomatic society, they might have been first to realize like war is not the answer. We're not going to, like we don't need to compete for products. Competing with products is not, the best way to get the best product. Let's try some other ways. And so, I really do get the feeling that is the way that it's supposed to be interpreted.
Yeah, and I think also in a galaxy where like there's it's not infinite, obviously, but like
there's so many unexplored territories
into these kind of marginal or frontier areas, and then there's entire segments of the known galaxy that have not been explored sufficiently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that takes a lot of pressure off. And then also, like, if we just apply like a real world understanding of demographics and demographic transition, is that the more developed a society is, the less they reproduce. And so you probably have that too, where there's like an amount of wealth and material well-being there that their population self-limits.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's so much space, like people are constantly leaving. And so they might have like a replacement level. But you're right. They did kind of portray it as being a lot of wide open, beautiful spaces, and then some kind of highly dense but sophisticated urban areas.
Anyone who looks at the unknown regions here, right below my hand, they can see that there is this entire region that, at the very least, is open towards expansionism, even if it's not unoccupied.
It's definitely not unoccupied, because like in Rebels we learned
wild space.
What was out there in unknown regions, and they had magic to get there.
Well, I don't know the Disney stuff. I honestly haven't paid a whole lot of attention. But the Ceruvi, I believe.
What's that?
The Ceruvi. They were the
Ceruvi. That's EU stuff, but in
dude, I'm only EU. I don't live in
I understand, but I'm just saying in Rebels, like Zeb, his character, I forget what his alien species is at the moment. I feel embarrassed to not remember, but anyway, their planet, they had a colony, because their planet was destroyed by the Empire and everybody massacred, and Zeb was like one of few survivors of this like massacre the Empire did to these people. But then they're like, oh, we have this part of this mythology, this story, many like, whatever, a long time ago, colonists from their culture had set out to the unknown regions and found a planet and colonized it. And so they had a whole population of their species that was out in the unknown region or unexplored space or wild space. It's called different things in different places.
Yeah.
But essentially it's the kind of like not really explored area. And
more frontier region. Like
they found a colony out there. Yeah. And there was like a big EU, what was it? Far Orbit, I want to say. Was it Far Orbit?
Far Eye, maybe?
No, I think it was Far Orbit was the name of the ship, but basically like right around the time of the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
They sent out exploration vessels, which are like kind of more along the lines of Star Trek, where they're like 100% self-sufficient.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, what happened is it sent a whole lot of Jedi and volunteers, and they basically put them into stasis, and they sent them out to the far reaches of the galaxy
to map it.
Right. To map it, to meet people, to colonize where it was appropriate, and to try, to establish peaceful relationships with anyone they met. It actually was very Star Trekian.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's how you ended up with Jorus, to use Sabak.
Yeah, exactly. And also the Chiss ascendancy is somewhere out there, which we'll probably explore a little bit in the upcoming Ahsoka show at the end of the summer.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Cool. Let's move on. So we're done talking about the High Republic?
We are. It is you.
I just want to say Star Wars Explained is really rad. His name is skipping my mind right now, but him and his wife do regular Q&A podcasts, and he does a bunch of great breakdowns. And in one of the interviews, I don't think we've clipped today, Leslie Headland mentions Star Wars Explained by name because they do canon updates. So they just kind of have a long file. They've done like all the canon we know, right?
Oh.
And then as new canon is introduced, they just add it or incorporate it into their video.
You should text me that in the chat.
Just look up Star Wars Explained canon timeline, I think.
Okay, I'll do that.
But it's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, it's just what we know that's in canon, right? So there's all sorts of stuff. So now we're moving on to what?
Well, it's your turn with your IGN article.
Okie dokie. Come up my screen, because remember, there we go.
So go ahead and zoom in at least 2.
Control press. Oops.
Yeah, that's good.
So I wanted to bring up this article. This is an IGN talking about Star Wars: The Acolyte. This is just from last month. Anyway, I wanted to kind of explain this when she pitched it to Kathleen Kennedy. And I'll stop right there and say a lot of people are like, oh, this is Kathleen Kennedy's project, and so it's going to suck because she sucks because the sequel sucked. And
Who's Kathleen Kennedy? I don't know this person.
She is the fucking president of Lucasfilm.
Okay.
And she was handpicked by George Lucas to be his successor, and she has movie credits that are just ridiculously long. She's responsible for the Indiana Jones, or one of the many people responsible. She has producer credits on like Indiana Jones and Goonies and E.T.
So
and
she's definitely been stuck in a room with George Lucas while he talks about the politics of Naboo and how they interact with the Gungans.
Yeah, she worked very closely with Spielberg and Lucas on a bunch of projects, and then other directors. You can look up her filmography, and just her producer credits alone are just like, oh my god, some of these are like the most iconic movies of like the late 80s through the like mid 90s.
Right.
And she's been just doing it forever, right? And she's well accomplished. I can't recall off my head how many awards she's gotten. Other than, kind of like lifetime achievement and, woman of the year and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
Like as far as like Oscars, Emmys and stuff like that, I don't know off the top of my head, but she definitely has a shit ton of producer credits. So
Right.
she's not doing movies in Star Wars to push some kind of weird agenda. Like she's been doing movies for a very long time, movies that we love, that we would never ever accuse of this. It just, people didn't understand how poorly the sequel trilogy was written and executed. And yes, she is responsible for that as an executive producer.
Right.
But there's enough blame to get passed around as far as how the sequels went, and also how some of these other Disney Plus shows have developed. We were talking about Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi being like really uninspiring and kind of garbage. I have zero interest to watch them again, but I'm watching Andor for the fourth fucking time.
That's the problem, is they were unnecessary. They didn't need to exist. They were stories that were just filling in things and not doing it very interestingly.
Yeah. And treading on known characters that people are attached to and have a particular expectation. And so they disappoint. And that's one of the cool things about Acolyte. If we wanted to make a list of cool things of why I think the Acolyte will surprise us like Andor did. Andor was the only show I was excited when they made the big list of announcements. Most of those projects never got made or developed. They were just ideas when they got
announced. That's why I
just
don't even bother watching.
Yeah. But anyway, I heard about Andor and I was fucking stoked, and I was like, this is going to be amazing. And there were a ton of people that are like, oh, we don't even want this. It's a prequel to a prequel about a character we don't give a fuck about. And then after it came out and people were able to like digest it, they're like, oh my God, like this white is everything not like this, right?
Yeah.
Like this is fucking amazing. And I think Acolyte is going to tread a similar line. I don't know much about Headland. I don't think she is as competent as Tony Gilroy, who like did the fucking Bourne movies and shit, which were super popular, and has kind of done the political spy, covert agent kind of type thing many times, and has been quite successful and has been rewarded for it, right? And so I don't think that Headland's necessarily going to be on level with Gilroy, but I do expect the Acolyte to be really different because it's going into this High Republic era. It's and we're going to talk a little bit about more of those elements now. But I think because it's in an era and none of these characters exist anywhere else, like you can use the Star Wars universe for telling a good story rather than like coming into a situation like Book of Boba Fett, where like you're trying to take a character everybody is perceived, even though he has virtually no screen time. Like Boba Fett's not a developed character in the original trilogy. Did you just do a fucking Gungan? Misa, what? You're like, oh.
No. Boba Fett.
Wilhelm
Sarlacc pit. Yeah.
And yeah, when he falls in the pit, he has like virtually no character development, but people.
Everything after that really was a match. Okay, so I was in the middle of that era with all the people that just fucking loved the Mandalorians with all their hearts, but didn't have a way to tell Lucas that directly. And so they were just writing fan fictions and stuff on the early internet and making up stats for Mandalorian battle armor, which was always just so much better than anything anyone else ever had, because it always had little tricks and everything mixed in. And it turns out that they fucking read that fan fiction and they made it into the new Mandalorian show and the Boba Fett show, where they're like, oh, he's got fucking rockets in his knees, because why wouldn't you? That's a spot you could put a thing. Of course he's got something there. Something from the elbow? No doubt. He fucking hits someone in the face, comes through with an elbow, rocket maybe. I don't fucking know.
Right. So, but Boba Fett's not a very well-developed character,
No,
but
and so it's
people were
right.
attached to the idea of
Yeah.
what Boba Fett was. So when they did a show where they're like, he's not going to be the lone bounty hunter that you think he is.
Right.
He's going to, like, he has his family. And I think they did a decent job on the Tusken part of that show.
It
I thought,
really was an excellent example of the found family.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought so too. And
Yeah.
just kind of some of the world building, like when he did the fucking lizard drugs or whatever. And then, like, wow.
You mean the lizard invaded his cranium and gave
but then
him fucking
in that
trippy dreams? Like,
that hallucination.
He didn't consent to that, man.
No,
They
he
just
didn't.
no, he didn't
But it's
know
a
what
rite
he
of
was getting
passage.
into. But they didn't. Oh my! We've done mushrooms together. We did not like. We knew what we were getting into. We discussed what was going to happen. We didn't just cram mushrooms into each other's noses.
True. Okay. Well, it's a rite of passage, and that besides that, the whole like hallucination he had, right?
Yes.
Actually, like, in a roundabout way, developed Tatooine as a place and as a location, as a culture, right? Than anything that came before it in just like a 3-minute segment, because like they
Yes.
showed the division when the planet had water and this conflict, and showed how the Jawas and the Tuskens were the same species that diverged as they adapted to this new reality differently.
Yeah.
Like, and I thought that was fucking fascinating. But the point is that people went in being like, Boba Fett's a badass. And then it wound up being just kind of lackluster storytelling where you weren't really sure who. You're like, oh, these fucking weird Hutt twins are the villains. And then they're like, we're leaving. Here's a trophy or a token gesture. And they all leave. And then it's like the last episode. They're like, oh, the Pikes are the bad guys.
Right.
And now Cad Bane is here to settle some old grudge. Like, it made no fucking sense. But anyway,
as long as Timothy Oliphant comes back to avenge himself, I'm happy.
I think he will. He was supposed to be in Rangers of the New Republic. My guess is that he'll be tied into some property that's part of the Filoni verse that culminates in his movie, is my guess.
Okay.
Because he is a character people love, because he was in some of the first canon books, novels released after Disney acquired Lucasfilm. I want to say Aftermath, like the big one that wound up being that. But anyway, so back to this article. She pitched it. So everybody blames Kathleen Kennedy, says, oh, I don't like the Acolyte because Kathleen Kennedy like chose this project. If you listen to interviews with Leslie Headland, she went through the same process that everybody else does.
Mm-hmm.
She had an idea. She came and she pitched it. They said, oh, we're interested in that. Do a story treatment for us. Come back, have another meeting. She's been working on this show for like 4 fucking years.
Okay.
Right. And so she's put in her time, and she went through the same processes as all these other guys, all these other people, right? Like, pitch it, and work with it, do the story treatments, kind of develop it, then hire writers and hire, film crews and stuff like that, and do the production, the scheduling, and all that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, here it says she pitched the Acolyte as Frozen meets Kill Bill. I'll read a little bit of this because I think it's well written. Again, IGN.com. Yeah. How could a popular kids movie about a snow princess mix with a bloody as hell martial arts flick from Quentin Tarantino? And in the Star Wars universe, what? Well, have no fear. Headland just gave the fans a bit of a sneak peek as to how 2 beloved films have influence on the Acolyte. Quote, and this is Headland speaking, of course. Quote, I saw Frozen in the theater. I've still never seen Frozen, obviously, when it came out. Headland said, I was a grown woman and I cried all the way through it. And I thought if this movie had come out when I was younger, I would have had a completely different life. That's kind of a tall order, but okay. So much of it was about the sister relationship. So much of it was about the villain actually being a powerful but misunderstood woman. There was just so much of it. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I couldn't believe that it was a cartoon with music. It was hitting me on such a deep level, yet servicing the genre so well.
A cartoon with music happens all the time. That is Disney's bread and butter since the early 90s.
What? Misunderstood powerful women villains?
No. The cartoon with music. Like, I couldn't believe that it was a cartoon. Like, that's been around. There was the Renaissance.
the central story elements, like the fact that like this is a kids movie, this is a cartoon with music, and it's really hitting all these emotional notes and bringing up these really kinds of interesting questions about like what makes a villain. Again, we were discussing earlier that like morality and good and evil is a lot less black and white in the world we live in, right? And then this caricature that grew out of like the nationalism and the anti-communism of the post-war era, right? Where there's a good guy and a bad guy. Have you ever seen the trailer to the Return of the Jedi?
No.
Which was released in '83. Dude, it was like basically like Red Scare stuff to the max. Like it really felt like Ronald Reagan talking about the Soviet Union or something. It was fucking wild. But anyway, like so like this kind of moving beyond this pure dichotomy of good versus evil, I think that it's interesting, which is like, well, the villain, yeah, may be doing bad things, but like what is their motivation and where is it coming from? Right.
Okay. We're finally getting it.
We're finally getting it. Okay. So Headland said that it's this combination of emotional resonance with the genre genius that the Acolyte hopes to capture. The Acolyte is hitting a lot of deep emotional moments, and yet it's servicing exactly what you want from the genre from a Star Wars show. I think that's great.
Right.
It sounds good to me.
Just set me in a place where space travel is common and tell me how your average everyday person interacts. Like, if the world is shitty, why are they on a shitty world? Like, why wouldn't they leave? And it all too often it turns out it's because they're poor.
Yeah, so they can't afford to buy the ticket.
Yeah, exactly. I can't afford to leave California, even though it's super expensive.
Right.
Because it's super expensive.
Right. But what about Kill Bill, Tarantino's 2-part martial arts film that sees Uma Thurman slash off limbs, explode hearts, and so much more? How could that kind of movie fit into Star Wars?
That sounds like okay. If you can fucking force choke someone, you can force stop their heart.
Yeah, and slashing limbs off, the first 30 minutes of the very first Star Wars film ever made has someone gets their limb hacked off. Yeah, by Obi-Wan and
Obi-Wan's just like shit happens.
What's that?
Obi-Wan's like shit happens when you drink. Wow.
Right. Oh yeah, dude, and like Luke gets his limb cut off. Then you find out Vader had his limbs cut off, and then you go to the prequels and Anakin gets his limb cut off, and other people lose limbs and stuff.
It's all about losing limbs, getting maimed. Like, that is one of the more fun parts of storytelling in an RPG environment that we get to play with all the time. You just hack off limbs left and right, especially in Star Wars, because you're like, cybernetics, bitch.
Yeah, but it also like permanently changes, right? And then there's consequences, right? Because then now you're like, oh,
we played in
an ion blaster or something, and now I have to use my limb.
I find that interesting because we played in different settings where, like, in the Wizards of the Coast ones, you took a penalty to a lot of checks for having cybernetics because you were just closer to being machine, and so you were dark side. And in other ones, it was just like, nah, it's cool. You just have cybernetics. Go on.
Yeah. And that kind of makes sense in a lot of ways. Like, if you're more machine, then you're less connected to the Force. And I think there's kind of some like novelization explanations of why like Vader lost a lot of his power when he got all his limbs cut off.
Yeah. They've tried to certain stories have tried to, like, say that the droids aren't fully connected, even though like people that are connected to the Force can still sense a droid approaching. And so they said, like, oh, well, they sense the electronics or something like that. Yeah. And so it's like, well, are droids really connected to the Force? Because they might be. Maybe you actually are just sensing that electricity through the Force. Is the Force somehow connected to the electromagnetic spectrum?
Or you have heightened senses. So
you
hear a servo whirring or whatever.
Karen.
I don't know. Either way. So let's finish this one. I say Kill Bill. This is Headland speaking. I say Kill Bill because I think it's a really good reference for the modern day martial arts film. Headland explained. Obviously, Tarantino took inspiration from a lot of movies that our action team and a lot of our design team pulled from, which is stuff from the Shaw Brothers to Akira Kurosawa in his samurai films, which was also a huge influence on Lucas. But also films like Ang Lee's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is why we're going to call the Acolyte Crouching Wookiee, because there's a Wookiee character.
Please.
A Wookiee. No, there is a Wookiee Jedi.
Crouching Wookiee, hidden crate dragon.
Hidden crate dragon. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, the guy who has replaced Peter Mayhew as Chewbacca in the sequels, he's gonna also play, because he's like fucking 7 foot tall or whatever. He's also gonna play a Wookiee in the Acolyte, and so you have a High Republic era Wookiee Jedi. How fans can be like, oh my god, this is fucking Kathleen Kennedy meddling woke bullshit, blah 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 blah. When they're like, this is gonna be like all
Wookiee
Jedi lightsabers fucking each other up with martial arts and the Force, and like one of the Jedi is a fucking Wookiee, and and people are like, why do we?
If ever there was gonna,
sorry, go ahead.
Bitch, please, if you can get me a fucking Wookiee martial artist Jedi who doesn't use a lightsaber out of concern for preserving life, because he's like, it's too easy to kill someone with a lightsaber. I got to make sure I'm completely in control. I don't want to hurt anyone, because the Wookiees inherently have a code where they don't use their claws for attack. They only use them for climbing. And so they're all about that, like, hey, everyone needs to have a fair chance sort of mentality.
Wookiee doesn't need, I mean, granted, like deflecting blaster bolts and shit is a pretty essential use.
You can still do that with the Force, though. It fucking happened in the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic video games. You could get an unarmed parry, deflect, reflect thing. It was the whole lightsaber, triumvirate. Where you're just
right. And Vader did that too, but I thought there was kind of a question of whether he actually used the Force to absorb that, or if that was his robot hand that he just put up and stopped the bolt.
In this game, it is no longer canon. Fuck y'all. It was definitely meant to be like, oh, I don't want to use a lightsaber, and so I can absolutely just be like, pop, 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 pop.
Yeah, but Wookiees rip arms off, right?
I mean, not Jedi Wookiees, I hope.
Well, no, right, but Wookiees can, and I think that's another cool thing, that maybe the Book of Boba Fett was too much fan service, but when Black Chrysanthemum sees the fucking Trandoshan, and he goes up to him and fucking rips his arms off. Remember? No.
No, I don't. I only watched it
because
once.
It's a forgettable fucking show. But there is that scene, because like it's only referred to in I think a line in A New Hope or Empire. I think it was A New Hope, when 3PO is beating Chewbacca.
But Wookiees aren't known to, or like, or what was it? Our droids aren't known for tearing people's arms off.
Tearing limbs off. Yeah. So anyway, I like that throwback.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're gonna have a Wookiee Jedi. So crouching Wookiee, hidden crate dragon. The Acolyte will stream on Disney in 2024, set during the final days of the High Republic era, over a century before The Phantom Menace. The series will be the furthest back live-action Star Wars universe has ever gone, and will follow the bad guys. Squid Game star Lee Jung-jae and Amidala Stenberg are set to lead the series. When doing a Star Wars show that was going to be from the perspective of who we usually see as villains, it made sense to set it during a time period where the Jedi were in power, Hedlund said. That meant it was a time of peace, which meant, where is your war in Star Wars? So martial arts films felt like the next logical step. Not only did martial arts films inspire George Lucas, but they're also able to be about spiritual war, emotional warfare that's also deep relationships like brother and sister, father, son, master, pupil. And so that was my way in how to make a Star Wars show that took place technically during a time of peace. Don't worry, there's no singing in it, Hedlund quipped. That's it.
Scroll back up a bit. Right there. Okay. Cool.
Oh, should I have just read this?
No. It was fine. I was looking up here.
Great. Come back in 94. Cool. I will go ahead and close this guy.
So I think that does actually kind of lead into talking about the fighting style that we can expect to see. And what it was, I realized, just now, is it sounded like, and I'm outing myself right now, it sounds like this is from the point of view of what we would not typically see, the bad guy. The Acolyte is someone who's not on the side of the Jedi, correct?
Yes. And so I think that might be elsewhere, but maybe not. We might not have included it. She said no, she said some stuff on in this question about whatever queer coded.
Yeah. We'll get
But
there.
there was a couple interviews she did, and she kind of tried to explain it. But she's basically like, as growing up basically as a lesbian in a world that at the time didn't accept you for who you were, she generally found herself to not really fit in with the kind of heterosexual, like identifying with the princesses, right? With the heterosexual princesses.
Right.
She specifically cites Ursula in The Little Mermaid as kind of being like, she's like sexy diva, but also like kind of queer, like kind of interesting, right?
Yeah.
And so she just said because of where she
powerful.
Sorry?
And powerful.
And powerful. And so she says essentially like in my headspace when I was growing up, because she's not that old, dude. She's like, I think she's
younger than either of us. Yeah.
Yeah, she's younger than both of us. But anyway, so like when she says, and because she refers to like playing video games and stuff in other interviews when she was younger or a teenager, and it's like, oh yeah, that's right. She grew up in the modern world, right? Yeah. This isn't Lucas, right?
Right.
She kind of she's a millennial, I think, right? Born in the mid 80s. At any rate, like, so she, in her perspective, she kind of identified more with villains. And so when she pitched it to Lucasfilm, she kind of said, hey, I kind of want to tell the story of like the Jedi and their fall from grace, right? And kind of showed the fundamental flaws in thinking of the Jedi. And I want to do that by focusing the story. The protagonist is a female dark side user. And as I understand, and not to spoil, I think in the celebration panel they did, they discussed that one of the Padawans actually left the Jedi Order and was like investigating things on their own, I think, kind of thing. And then teams back up with their old master to kind of dig deeper into some stirrings they're seeing or some kind of mysteries. But I thought it was very interesting. She just simply wants to tell a story from the perspective of what we would normally consider the villain, to kind of show the moral ambiguity of what being a villain is, right? And then also to just kind of be different and be like, how would it be like to film a show where the Jedi aren't like, we just kind of have this assumption, right? Like we did in the prequel trilogy where we're like, oh, he's a slave, slavery is bad, so that's a bad thing, even though they didn't show it, right?
No one got whipped. No one had any.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, like their form of slavery was pretty like kind of ambivalent. Like nobody was getting whipped or anything like that. The only time anything bad happened to Shmi was when she was taken away from her slavery.
When she was taken away from slavery?
Yeah. As soon as she was kidnapped by the Tusken,
that she got kidnapped by fucking Tusken Raiders.
Exactly. Yeah, that was the only time anything bad ever happened in her life, was when she was removed from slavery. Because when she went with Lars,
the stand for water eggs to death.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like her going with Lars, that's just slavery. Like, you're bringing bringing into the world and raising like other people's children. Not great.
Yeah, dude. But anyway, I think it's really interesting that she wants to approach this from the perspective of like, I want the protagonist, the main characters of the show, to be the ones we commonly perceive of as villains. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Andor work too, right? Which is why I think the Acolyte, and it's the only show I'm really excited that they're doing. I mean, I'm going to watch all the Ahsoka stuff. I'm excited to see what they do. Speaking of which, Ray Stevenson fucking they just announced today he died. And he plays Balin, which is one of the kind of like, we don't know yet, but kind of one of the dark force users, it appears, in the Ahsoka trailer. That's him. And he played a bunch of other, I guess he was in the Thor movies, which I never watched, and some other things. He was in Rome, I think I mentioned last week. Ray Stevenson, though, he just died, 58 years old. Probably
that is way too young.
Got a booster shot or something.
Your ass.
What's that?
Said shut your ass.
He probably did, man. Booster shots calling all sorts of fucking otherwise healthy 50-something-year-olds to keel over and die.
Hey, I've got at least 15 years to prove that wrong.
Man.
Let's see. What do we got? Boom. Boom.
What's next on the tracker?
We're going to do this.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about martial arts, I think.
Yeah.
And the director of The Acolyte, Leslie Headland, has already described The Acolyte as a Star Wars martial arts show. It's essentially a martial art film where we can see the Jedi and possibly the Sith really demonstrate.
This is all footage from Star Wars The Old Republic online role-playing game.
And you know, I've seen a lot of people use these clips. This is like a big battle scene, like where a bunch of them clash, right?
Yeah, it basically shows the Jedi.
Is this on Malachor by the chance?
No, I think this is on Coruscant because this is an attack on the Jedi training grounds, and I believe it is Coruscant. And I think that's the whole point of it, is that it's the Sith coming out of nowhere and attacking the headquarters of the Republic, the Jedi, everything that is like supposed to be stable. And it has some of the fucking coolest battle scenes. So if you want to see like, more like this, just search, Star Wars, The Old Republic trailer, and you'll get this.
Is it on Steam?
It's on Steam. It's going to be on YouTube. I would go to Steam first. It's fucking...
No, I mean the game itself.
Oh, the game? Yeah, I think it's Steam. I think it's on Epic. I don't know. It's an online RPG, so it's pretty much trying to spread itself.
Is it an MMO?
Yes, yeah.
Like, so you kind of like open world and you can like cruise around and do whatever you want?
Yeah, I actually played it for a while. The only thing that kind of turned me off of it is you had to do these like space battles, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm literally playing a mini game that's like, the old X-Wing, versus TIE Fighter game. It was just, I'm on a rail in a ship and trying to shoot things as I pass by them, on this roller coaster. It was really boring. And I was just like, man, you literally could have done like, fucking make a mini game that is TIE Fighter versus X-Wing. It would have been great.
But I thought like also like the space battles in Battlefront were kind of lame and repetitive.
They were.
Because it was just like, oh, we're over a different location. It's a different battle because it's a different planet.
But I mean, that ultimately you're going to have that no matter what, because you can't just, well, you can, with new games, you can keep making new areas, and they do that. All the big, I've never played it before. Anyway,
but they didn't have terrain elements. There was never a space battle that included like asteroids or
right. There was nothing big, no major changes, and that's a huge complaint for me. Is like an MMO that is supposed to be about Star Wars needs to have all aspects and not just like I'm on a roller coaster, rail and trying to shoot things as they go by. That's not enough.
Sure. Okay. Well, let's carry on with this video.
Yep.
Demonstrate their martial art prowess in a way that we have never seen before. The Acolyte will also be heavily inspired by Chinese wuxia films and other Eastern martial art films, which I actually think is perfect for something like the Star Wars universe. And if you're not familiar with the wuxia films, the best way to describe it is a genre of film that features the adventures of martial artists in ancient China, and it tends to have a lot of mythical and fantastical elements in it, which really makes it more of a historical fiction fantasy sort of film, which is why you get characters seemingly flying all over the place and performing these inhuman acrobatic moves. And I think this will fit in perfectly with the lore surrounding Star Wars and the Jedi. After all, it's easily explainable that the Jedi would be able to perform such feats through the Force. And we've seen elements of these things where the Jedi would enhance their physical abilities through the Force, like Force running, Force jumps, and so on. So really what the Acolyte is doing is just doubling down on it, giving us a closer look on what we know the Jedi are already capable of. Not to mention, Star Wars has had a long history of taking inspiration from Eastern.
Might I say, I hate that fight.
Dooku versus Yoda?
Yeah. At so few points is Yoda close enough to actually make an attack. And so a lot of the things that he does with the lightsaber that looks like attack is merely just like swishing at thin air, and Dooku never would have bothered to block them.
Yeah, I think the only parts of Attack of the Clones that really like stick in my head are the arena scene.
Mm-hmm.
And also Padme and Anakin sneaking in right through the droid factory. That seems pretty cool because I just kind of picture everything from like RPGs. Like, that'd be a really cool way to integrate a skill challenge.
Right.
Like, you have to like jump and climb and hide and time things, and that can all be rolls and like some of it's luck.
Yep.
He loses his weapon as a consequence of botching a roll, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And all these things. So, I really like those scenes. And then the only other ones are chasing the assassin, Zamweasel, and the first time you get to see the underworld in Coruscant, right?
Oh yeah.
And then also Dex. I think Dex is one of the fucking underutilized characters. It's just like as Darth was saying in his video about Kylo Ren that he released yesterday, Star Wars is all about relationships, and he kind of goes through this long list. He's like, Obi-Wan wouldn't know about Kamino if he didn't have a relationship with Dex, who's just like a fucking, a crass.
He's a fry chef.
Caricature of a fry cook, right? And his vast knowledge working in this diner and getting to interact with people from all around the galaxy. Like if Obi-Wan didn't have a relationship with them, you don't need to know where it came from. He's just like, oh, my Obi-Wan, my friend, I haven't seen you in so long. That's all we need to know.
That's interesting too, because it felt like Qui-Gon Jinn did not have that level with people. It felt like he held himself above, and so like Obi-Wan might have lowered himself to kind of get away from the same fate as his master. I'm going to be a man of the people simply because my master didn't do that and he met a bad fate. Like I want to have help everywhere I go.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to think about it. But yeah, so about the relationships and Dex, and then if he didn't go to Yoda and like have this relationship with Yoda and the Padawans, like they wouldn't have figured out that Kamino got erased from the system. Right?
Well, you had that one librarian who was like, if it's not in our systems, it doesn't exist. And you're like,
Jocasta knew.
Yeah, you are very, very sure of yourself. And that sounds anti-Jedi-ical.
Well, the other thing is that like some of the best scenes with Jocasta knew got cut. Because there's a scene in the Attack of the Clones that didn't make the final. Of Jocasta knew when he goes in to talk to her about that, they have a longer scene where they're walking and they talk about Count Dooku. And I'm like, one of the things the prequels didn't do was really develop the fucking villains at all.
Justify Dooku, yeah.
Christopher Lee, you connected enough, like that scene where he has Obi-Wan hostage and he says, you should help me. Bad things are happening. I really could use Qui-Gon right now. Because he was my Padawan, right? And so there's this relationship that even Obi-Wan has with Dooku that happened that you didn't know about until they start having this conversation. And they just underutilized it. And that scene that they cut, I understand why they cut it. The movie's long enough already. But like those kinds of just like a little bit of extra dialogue would have gone such a far way to like help you be more interested in Count Dooku as a character, because he literally shows up at the end of Attack of the Clones, right, on Geonosis, and then he's at the very beginning of Revenge of the Sith and gets killed. And if you don't watch the Clone Wars and get to like understand who this character was, or now his backstory with Tales of the Jedi, I don't know if you've seen that yet.
And no, I'll have to write it down.
Watch Tales of the Jedi.
I'll have to write it down. It's so unfair though that the people who are only watching the major media releases are just left in the dark and expected to do their homework. It's like, fuck you.
I agree. But I mean, the Clone Wars didn't exist when Episode 2 and Episode 3 were written.
Yeah, so there was no intention to fill people.
No intention.
It's even worse.
Right. And that's, that is what it is. So anyway, we went way off on a tangent just talking about you didn't like the way Yoda fought Dooku.
Yeah.
Carry on. Which is totally fine. I mean, I'm always down to talk Star Wars. Sometimes it's better than being like, we're just a little bit closer to nuclear war today.
So watch this shit. Watch where Yoda's attacking.
Capable of. Not to mention, Star Wars has had a long history of taking inspiration from Eastern influences like samurai films and Buddhism, so really drawing on wuxia films as inspiration should really fit in quite well with the rest. It's also worth mentioning that wuxia films tend to discuss topics like justice and social equality, all of which are already staples of the Star Wars franchise.
Yeah, and that was more to the point, I think.
What's that? That martial arts was always really a big part of the franchise?
No, that justice and serving the greater good and such were always part of wuxia and supposedly part of Star Wars. I mean, the more we analyze Star Wars, the less easy it is to just immediately be like, of course they're all about justice, because too often they are
we
not.
know that Kurosawa at least was a huge influence because the characters C-3PO and R2-D2 were taken from
Yes.
almost directly from, I forget the name of the film, but from a Kurosawa film where they had these kind of tall, skinny, and the kind of short, round guy that were kind of the
bumbling
comic relief,
fools,
who were kind of like nobodies. They weren't part of the royal families, or they weren't great warriors, but they were just there to kind of serve as like a narrative sinew between all this kind of grand epic happening around them.
Yeah,
and so in that sense, he pulled directly from them, and he says that he admits that freely.
I was just going to say they are the everyman caught up in the world of the
in an epic struggle or whatever. Yeah. Cool. What do we got next? Because we're already over an hour in.
No problem, man. I'm having a good time talking if you are.
Yeah, I am.
We're caught up in this, which is Echo-based network.
The Acolyte showrunner Leslie Headland has a new interview that just became available today. As always, Headland says some really interesting and perhaps divisive things. Today she talks about her queer nature as a filmmaker and how this will impact the upcoming show, The Acolyte. Let's get into it.
One of the things I wanted to say earlier when I said, oh, have you had a chance to like look through YouTube? If you go back 3 years ago when they first announced this, until
I had no idea it was that old.
It's all shit talking. 100%. This is going to be garbage, blah, blah, blah. We hate it. These people are involved. Oh my God. They're like bringing it in. They want to have a female centric. And then like Headland herself's like female centric. Yeah. My main character, I'm building the story around a central character. Like most stories are written, and that character happens to be female. But if you look at the cast, the Jedi Master's a male, and then the Wookiee's a male, and then there's all these other male characters that are in it. She's like, yeah, female centric in the sense that I'm telling the story of a fucking female protagonist. Right. And my protagonist happens to be a dark side user, which we normally look at as a villain. But in my story, it's going to be from her perspective. Yeah. Are the Jedi the good guys?
It just happens to be.
Am I morally justified in doing the things I do? Sorry.
No, I mean, is the protagonist female? Flip a coin. You tell me. That is the representation of the planet fucking Earth is 50% male, 50% female.
50-50.
Yeah. So flip a fucking coin.
And speaking of which, where are there female protagonists, like good female protagonists? I mean, Kill Bill is an influence on this, and the main character, that's a woman.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Like, if not Star Wars, where? Like, you don't like it here, where should we put it?
As we mentioned, I mentioned to you on the phone or maybe on Thursday or something, V for Vendetta is another good one.
I love V for Vendetta.
Me too. It's a great
I watched the movie when it came out in the military and was like, oh God, we're all fucked. That was my first.
Do you know how Alan Moore conceived of the idea to do that one?
No, I don't think.
When Margaret Thatcher got elected PM in the UK.
Because I have the fucking graphic novel, because after years and years of watching the movie, I was just like, I should get the source document, see how it compares.
Yeah, and I think it even says it in the prologue of at least the edition of the graphic novel that I read. He's like, this came from seeing the logical consequences of neoliberalism, and oh my God, how fucking prescient was he, showing that we basically get a religious zealotry and this kind of intolerant, intolerant dystopian fascist government. And in V for Vendetta, they utilize a virus to kill people without, because I think they even have this discussion. It's like, why nukes or radiation? We want to be able to use this space again. We just need to get rid of some of the surplus population. Yeah. So they use a virus, and then they release it clandestinely, and then they're the only ones with the fucking cure, and so then the fascist regime is able to take over by being the one who offers the solution to
They're
this big
saviors.
problem.
Yeah,
and then you can't help but see big pharma right there in it. It's like, oh, the government colluding with big pharma. Like, this is like V for fucking Vendetta, and with the attack on fucking people who dress in drag and trans kids and abortion and all this other stuff. You're like, oh my God, dude, like fucking
it's fucking
Alan
happening
Moore, what
here.
the fuck was up? He knew the logical endpoint of neoliberalism is a fucking religious
it's always
fundamentalist
other.
society, a fascist society. Go ahead.
It's always going to be otherism. The glue can be religious, the glue can be, ideological, but in the end, it's all about otherism. Like getting rid of the other until there is nothing left. And that's where it all tends to fall apart, is when you have nothing left to fight against because you got rid of X, Y, and Z. What's left to glue you together? Like, you can't, that sort of society doesn't run on the idea of love or anything like that. It runs on the idea of hate. And so when there's nothing left to hate, what do you do? And that's where that show stepped in really well and said, this is what happens. You have to have a fucking revolution. You have to change minds. You have to go to something that isn't hate-based because it won't sustain.
Right. And interestingly, so anyway, V for Vendetta is another one where the protagonist is a female, because V himself is kind of like not really the central part of the story. The story
he says it
through the perspective of Evie.
Evie,
yeah. Okay. It's been a while. I just remember Natalie Portman is in it, and in the movie they cast her as the main character, and she's fucking great.
Yeah, and the idea is that she is the main character. V is simply there he is the changing of the bells, I guess.
I mean, he was just part of the legacy, and he's basically throughout the show, if I remember correctly, or the book, he's essentially training her to replace him. Yeah, and then she becomes V, because you need some kind of vigilante figurehead that's going to fight for fucking justice in this fascist dystopia.
Yeah. And in our military terms, it's basically the changing of the guard.
Yes, basically. Yeah. All right, let's continue. Echo Base Network. I don't watch this specifically, so we can talk about it.
Hey, what'd you say?
Oh, I just said I've never watched these guys before. I just saw this clip and I saw the thumbnail, and I thought, I made the assumption that they were going to be like kind of the typical Star Wars fan on the internet, which is just talking shit nonstop about stuff and never having any fucking nuanced opinion about anything. And anyway, I wanted to include this clip because he brings up some interesting points.
You will not be disappointed, sir.
The Acolyte is an upcoming American television series created by Leslie Headland. It is part of the Star Wars franchise set at the end of the High Republic era by It is part of the Star
What happened?
Oh, I'm trying to go back a bit. Because that looks like scarring, right?
It looks like a scar to me.
Because Marilyn is not, it's a different race. I saw it at first and I was like, oh, Miralucan. That's been done before, where it's a species that is basically blind, to normal radiation, but sees the Force, which makes the whole existence of their eyes, or lack thereof, explainable. But yeah,
I don't know. Why do we have a tailbone? We haven't had tails for fucking millions of years.
No, exactly. We're in the process of completely losing them. So that's interesting to me. But I remember thinking it was Miralucan, and then I was like, oh no, Marilyn, they're typically a green skin species, aren't they?
No, they're usually kind of pale blue.
Okay.
At least how they're depicted in, I mean, they're not part of canon, right? So they can make them however the fuck they want. But in the EU material, I think they were more like pale and blind, maybe pale blue. Sorry,
E is canon, damn it.
It is part of the Star Wars franchise set at the end of the High Republic era before the events of the main Star Wars films. Amanda Stenberg and Lee Jung-jae star in the leading roles. The first episode will debut sometime in 2024. In an interview with Empire that just released today.
Do you hear that music in the background?
Mm-mm.
This guy's fucking with us. He has copyrighted music in the background.
No.
Yeah. No.
But how did he skip a copyright strike?
he might not care. Like listen to it.
Leslie Headland made some very interesting statements about her childhood, personal life, and being a Star Wars showrunner. Empire reports, though we don't know who exactly is the big bad, Headland is keen to emphasize the focus will be on female villains. It goes back to her early fascination with them. Headland says, "When I was a younger queer girl, I was just hanging out with Ursula, the sea witch from The Little Mermaid. As a queer girl growing up, if you don't identify with the heroes and the villains show up and they're all queer-coded, you're like, yes, that's me." Headland also says about her upcoming show, The Acolyte, "As a queer filmmaker, you're going to see some camp, inevitably, but I would say that tonally, our references are darker." If the term queer-coded is new for you, here's what it apparently means.
Say again?
Dark references.
Yeah.
I mean,
queer coding.
Sorry.
Okay.
She's won a bunch of awards for Russian Doll.
Mm-hmm.
And I've still only seen like the first episode, pilot episode or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I could tell you, like, yeah, it's fucking dark. It's filthy too. Like, it's raunchy. But she's done other raunchy things like The Bachelorette.
Write that down real quick.
It's raunchy, but like at the same time, also the themes are really fucking dark so far.
So it's Man in the Box playing in the background.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Do you think he's doing that on purpose?
Why else would you put something that it's so low?
He's got 30,000 subscribers. I don't think he cares if we use
It's
3
no,
minutes.
it's so weird though to do it. Like the volume is so low in my headset, but I can still hear it. So I'm just like, why would
I
you do
couldn't
that?
tell until you said something.
Yeah,
Okay.
so weird. Anyway,
Is the subtextual coding of a character in media as queer. Though such a character's sexual identity may not be explicitly confirmed within their respective work, or they may in fact be straight despite their queer mannerisms, a character might be coded as queer through the use of traits and stereotypes recognizable to the audience. Such traits are greatly varied.
So they're basically like, what is queer coded? And she's like, it's when they just like don't necessarily present their sexuality.
yeah,
And
or don't present it in a certain way.
yeah, like she said, there could be a heterosexual character that just kind of presents as you don't know, right? You get, I mean, that's a common way to do it too. Like, you don't know. I'm trying to think of characters, like Tara, right, from what was it, season 3 of Walking Dead? Oh, you haven't fucking seen The Walking Dead, have you?
No.
Jesus fucking Christ, bro.
Never will. Never will.
Better.
No, I'm not gonna watch it. It's boring.
On.
It's boring.
It's not boring.
It's human drama with a back set of fucking zombies. It's so pointless.
Why do you not want human drama?
I didn't say
that's
I
where
didn't,
that's
but
where
I
we
didn't say I
fundamentally
didn't. Okay.
differ.
Everything is human drama. Fucking especially Game of Thrones and all that. But you know what? Game of Thrones wasn't primarily about zombies. It was primarily about fucking humans interacting with humans. They didn't try to doll it up with fucking the occasional threat of The Walking Dead. No, they were like, hey, 90% of this show is about human interaction. And
90% of the show is about human interaction leading up to the zombies.
Right. But better than watching fucking people that are like, oh no, there are zombies in the world and I beat my wife. It's like, no, you beat your wife and there happen to be zombies in the world, you fucker. Like, what the hell?
Okay,
That's why
okay.
like,
Either way, there's characters there where you're like, you don't know for a couple seasons because they live in a world where like romance is not like
shown on the camera.
Priority.
No, that is not shown on the camera. That's all it is. Romance is still happening. People don't stop romancing each other because there's Walking Dead. They just stop showing it on the camera because it's convenient.
Okay, well, whatever. When it does become convenient and they show it on camera, then you find out that she's actually like queer or whatever. And you couldn't really tell. You can kind of tell like maybe she was a little tomboyish, but that's all she's saying, right? It's like queer coded just means not conforming to like whatever society's dominant vision of what feminine and masculine should be.
Gotcha.
Right? That's how I'm reading it. That's why I wanted to stop and talk about it because I had never heard the term queer coded, but I could see how that makes sense. If you have a character who doesn't necessarily present like, it kind of almost presents as like non-binary, or like, I'm pretty sure it's a guy, right? Like, but can't really tell, kind of an effeminate guy, and then you find out he's kind of a effeminate guy, but like he's a playboy and he fucking bangs all sorts of chicks, right? That'd be queer coded.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that was what that last line was about. It's like, it may be that they are just over, the coding, basically.
Yeah.
But traits of exaggerated masculinity and femininity, vanity, and hypersexuality are frequent. Queer coding is a concept both in discussion of media portrayal of LGBT people and academic research involving queer theory or gender studies. Well, now that I know what it means, it's obvious why Leslie Headland is talking so much about it. Here we go again with Star Wars. We're there on a mission where good old-fashioned storytelling takes a back seat to agenda-driven modern-day politics. Star Wars used to be about escapism. It no longer is.
That's where I choose to cut it, because I edit this shit.
Was it ever about escapism, or was the original Star Wars like a look back and critique of a fucking horrific war that we spent over a decade murdering people and having our people murdered, right?
Oh yeah. And if you've read my notes, on the sheet, it's basically all about terrible fascism being overcome by fucking people willing to put their lives on the line to stop that.
That's right. Yeah. And it's like, oh, they're just pushing their modern world where instead of escapism, it's like Lucas like went to the very core of like the simplest storytelling, right? Like the Joseph Campbell hero's journey, super simple, but did all these elements that were new and unique and developed all these techniques.
And
right,
at the same
filming, like, that kind of thing. And really, it was a innovative filmmaker. And I've watched a bunch of interviews with him recently. And like the reason the prequel trilogy was like all done CG and on green screens and all that stuff is because like his goal was to innovate. Like he's like, when I make these movies, I want to try things that haven't been done before. And that's where he's really probably made his money. I mean, licensing, but like, and the sale of it. But ILM has been working with like it does studio work on contract for other movies and shit.
Yeah,
like ILM has been an innovator in special effects since the original Star Wars, and him founding ILM. And so he says himself, I've always wanted to innovate. That's why they did almost everything on a green screen. He's like, because we can finally do all these things that we couldn't before. Right. And that's where the volume came from. The new kind of like wraparound screen they're using for a lot of fucking Marvel and
wraparound
Star Wars
screen?
shows.
Are you talking about in the theaters?
No, the volume.
What are you talking about?
So they've developed a technique, instead of having to animate CGI on a green screen, they present the environments first and render those, and then they're on basically a big like wraparound plasma TV screen.
Oh, as the actors and
as like the set.
Yeah.
And
okay.
So if you're aware of it, you can watch things like Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian, and you can actually tell just through depth perception where the real set stops and then the volume of the screen begins. So it's not a green screen where they render on top of it.
They render it
on a TV.
Okay. To give a better sense of place and a better ability to act, basically.
Yes, and like for a lot of it, like lighting, they said they could never get the right lighting on Mando's helmet if they weren't actually presenting light from an environment. Like if they were using cameras or having to CG it in, you wouldn't actually have light. But since it's a screen,
it projects light, and then you can intensify it as necessary.
And it can reflect off things, and then you might do some tweaks in post-production to like brighten it or whatever, like you're saying.
So I don't know how much you know about things of this nature. ILM ray tracing is the common term, but the idea is basically like having a light source and having it bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce, and you can track it a certain number of bounces. They're like doing in video games real-time ray tracing. It's like 4 or 5, maybe even more years old since it's been implemented, but it basically gives you more realistic light. Like you might be standing, like we used to play Battlefront and all that stuff. Imagine if there was like a hover tank and there was some water under the hover tank, and you see like, the lines in, the the water, rippling out from the hover tank, but you can actually like see that there's another thing on the other side of the tank being bounced into the water and back to your eyeballs. And so you can actually like gather more information from the game, from the fact that they can like finally do this ray tracing technology. And now like putting into a show where you don't have to render it real time is like super basic these days, because they can just do it in normal video games in real time, like 30 to 60 frames per second. Like this fucking crazy shit. So you get much higher.
Are we done with this clip? I think we are.
No, we're not. We're gonna go.
We got another segment of his show.
Yes.
He just felt he's presenting it okay. He sounds unbiased. And then he's
it's
gonna be
I'm gonna go super bashed, y'all. Yeah. But he has
be garbage. She said queer like 4 times.
He's got more. He hates the idea that he can't escape his regular reality.
As proof of this, let's look at how the Empire interview article with Leslie Headland finishes, saying, "Ultimately, this is a show about power, and who is allowed to wield it. The Force is powerful. It is power we must respect," runs a line of dialogue from Lee's character, spoken in the Celebration exclusive teaser. And Headland promises a mystery thriller that reflects our own world. Headland says, "When you're doing something completely original, like we are, you want to question the status quo of the era that you live in. What I think is so interesting right now is that everybody thinks they're right. The Jedi really think they're right. And George Lucas tells us that they're wrong in The Phantom Menace. They missed a huge aspect of the dark side rising. That just felt like fertile ground to look into what's going on for all of us right now. It may still be set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but this version of Star Wars might feel closer to home than ever. And therein lies the problem, folks. This isn't shaping up to be Star Wars at all."
I mean, I don't know where you get that assessment.
Yeah. Like Star Wars. So science fiction has always been about critiquing what's going on in such an indirect manner that no one can send you to prison for it. That's literally the basis of science fiction. Is just talking shit about the real world in such a manner that you can get away with it.
And look at Heinlein, right? His novels, massive social critique. Yeah. I've never read Clark or any of those guys, but like, oh God, what's his fucking Kurt Vonnegut. I've read the Kurt Vonnegut novelist or whatever. Not best known for his science fiction, but he has
social criticism.
Yeah, he did publish a couple books of short stories, which included kind of futuristic science fiction. And you could tell his anxiety at the time of writing there was like population. So he has these several different stories with the same theme. Like one of them is like, there's like a maximum quota on number of people, so that like if a couple wants to have a child, they have to find someone volunteer to kill themselves.
Wow.
Unless they wait until like an elderly person in their family dies, and then their family is given like a slot to have a baby. Yeah. And so like
naturally there is a market for killing yourself.
Sure. And he doesn't
give your family money.
Explore that element.
Oh, really? That's such an obvious way to go.
It's a short story, right? So he doesn't get into like, the black market for like people kidnapping and murdering on behalf of like babies or whatever, right? No, but it's entirely set in like the it's basically like the moral conflict within the father, because the mother's obviously in with the doctors having a baby. Mm-hmm. Turns out he's like trying to figure it out. Okay, what am I going to do? The doctor, he finally figures it out. The doctor's like, got good news and bad news. Good news, you have healthy children. Bad news is you have 2 of them, because he had twins. And so now he's like, oh my God, what do I do? And you know what he winds up doing? Fucking shooting the doctor and the nurse. He kills the doctor and the nurse to make space for his fucking kids on the planet. And then there's another
punishments for that.
Another one of his short stories where like everything is so crowded, extended families are crammed into apartments. And so like the elder,
that doesn't sound dystopian
gets their own room, and you have all of these like adult children, right? Who are trying to like have lives and start families and stuff. And they're all like crammed into like basically cots all in like the main living space. And then it's this conflict of like, who is the heir to like the bedroom? Like, who is going to like get the private space in this situation where we're all fucking crowded together all the time? And then I think there's like, I don't recall exactly, but I think there's a plot to like poison the grandpa, but the grandpa's like really kind of playing a fucking psychological game with all of his grandkids, like fucking around trying to figure out who's going to be loyal and who is like self-interested. And it turns out most everybody is fucking self-interested because they live in an environment that's super competitive because it's overcrowded. Anyway, moral of the story, that is fucking social critique in science fiction.
Yeah.
And I Vonnegut's fucking great, and I love most everything I've read of his. And so reading some short stories that kind of touched on, elements of environmental destruction and overpopulation and all these things that were kind of problems that were talked about a lot more in like the 60s and early 70s than they are now. At any rate. So anyway, what do you think about his take on that? I don't really quite understand how you're like, this isn't Star Wars when like it clearly is.
Yeah, it very much is. And I think it's just maybe he was very young when Star Wars came out, or maybe he didn't analyze the themes of it at all and didn't see that it really was about fighting against a very entrenched power in order to make life better for people.
Yeah. You know, and he says it's not Star Wars. And one of the critiques that has come up that we didn't include anything on today is that when they first announced and she was talking, people were like, oh my God, she's hiring, she doesn't even like Star Wars and she's hiring people who don't like Star Wars. When in reality, and I think I might have mentioned this last Thursday, unless it was in a private phone call, but I'll repeat it again here, is that she actually hired all sorts of writers. She herself, as the showrunner and as the principal writer and as the principal director, does like Star Wars. And so we're going to show a couple clips to kind of solidify that for people.
Right.
If they're afraid that she's just because she's bringing her perspective as a queer person and her interest in villains as protagonists,
that she doesn't somehow understand Star Wars too.
That she doesn't somehow understand Star Wars. To this previous individual's post, where he's like, this isn't even going to be Star Wars because it has these other elements. Those are just elements of who she is and like elements that can be brought into storytelling.
Right.
And like also just realize that like those are the bits that like the media apparatus wants you to hear, because those are the ones that get people mad and talking, and those are the ones that generate ad revenue.
Right.
No one wants to hear her have a fucking conversation
that's pleasant
about playing role-playing games with their kids.
Yeah.
Or whatever, or with her friends. So anyway, she did bring in writers who love Star Wars. She herself is a fan of Star Wars, like not a super fan, maybe like Dave Filoni level, but like she's a fan. A super fan level like me, but she's a fan like you. No, I'm just kidding. At any rate, she did hire writers that had little interest in Star Wars, and I think that that's okay too. Because I think that all I really want is a good story. And that I think they understand and have enough support from Lucasfilm to be able to integrate that story. And she herself is like, we're going to make a fucking martial arts movie, right? Like about Jedi.
Well, and it's basically like someone who has a life outside of what's shown in the shows thus far. And it's like, well, we can't possibly have someone who's outside of the canon because then things might change. And it's like, that's fucking life, y'all. Shit changes. Like that is the only constant is change. There's sayings about that. Get used to it. But I was thinking, like, if you had to like only what you saw on the screen, neither of us could like Star Wars because we both like soil, and everything in Star Wars takes place on very sandy planets.
Yeah, or urban environments that have no like living soil.
Exactly.
Right. And or like a place like fucking Dagobah, which I guess technically has living soil, but it's also like probably hot and humid. Which we don't like.
It's all hot, humid bogginess, man. You only have decay.
With no air conditioning. Zach's
like, there's no air conditioning. I'm out.
Texas.
I'm out.
I'm gonna go hang out with the fucking asshole.
I'm gonna go hang out.
Leaving me there
with my friend Chris, who has air conditioning. And World of Warcraft. Don't forget that.
And World of Warcraft. At any rate, real quick. So anyway, she does. We're gonna just show a couple clips showing that she has some love of Star Wars, but I do think it's really important to like recognize that like to write good Star Wars, you don't have to be a fucking super fan. In fact, I would say some of the writing problems with the Filoniverse stuff, like The Mandalorian, is because they're too interested in trying to like, well, yeah, this would be cool. Let's have Black Chrysanthemum, character that's just known from comic books. And if you didn't know that or didn't go to YouTube to have that explained to you, you have no idea who this character is, right? That's now in like 6 scenes in this show.
Yeah. I don't know that.
Right? And not only is he there, but he's a bad guy, and now he's a good guy because he gets gifted to Boba Fett, and Boba Fett says, "You're not my slave."
He's like, cool, I'll be your slave voluntarily. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, and so there's a lot of elements to it that like I think that like part of the reason the writing is not great is because they fucking they're too focused on trying to like get the Easter eggs and get the tie-ins and like set shit up for something else.
You know what like, didn't have a lot of tie-ins aside from the main story was fucking Rogue One.
Yeah.
Like it had the immediate tie-in of like trying to get the plans and all that stuff. But other than that,
command staff.
Not much else had anything going for it. So you could have fun characters that were like, I'm one with the Force is with me. I'm one with the Force is with me. Like
speaking of martial arts in fucking Star Wars, Chirrut Îmwe is perfect example.
I love that character.
Dude, he's a fucking great character, dude. And all of his scenes are super badass. Like when he's like, oh, we got to plug in this fucking cable or whatever. And he's just like,
I'll make way.
Just dodging blaster fire, using the Force to kind of see it coming. Anyway, so there's like those elements where I'm like, oh, cool. If this has bringing in like that kind of level of like fantasy martial arts, right? Like not practical, like real world fighty stuff, but like bringing in those elements like they have in this what was that style or genre of film called?
Wuxia.
Wuxia?
Wuxia, I believe it is.
Wuxia? Okay, cool. Yeah, so bringing in those kind of fantasy elements, right? Being able to dodge bullets, right? But anyway, I think having writers there that just want to tell good stories is even more important because like that's what Gilroy did. Gilroy doesn't give a fuck about Star Wars. He said so himself. And guess what he did? He wrote better Star Wars than anybody who's a Star Wars fan could write because he started with who are my characters? What am I working with? What are their motivations? Are there consequences? Something that I hear more and more after Andor with like Mando season 3 and shit is like the plot armor is just getting fucking ridiculous.
It's so thick. So thick.
I mean, the only thing in the galaxy, the only armor in the galaxy better than Beskar is fucking plot armor. Like seriously, because like, it's fucking ridiculous. And at least in Andor, like you had characters with motivations, you had deaths, you had reactions to deaths, you had consequences to actions, right? I mean, Cassian was running away and then happened to get arrested and go to prison because of his actions on Aldhani made a zero tolerance policy.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, hey, you almost got away with it, except
you didn't.
You didn't. Yeah.
And you have to suffer the consequences, right? Like 6 years for what? For looking suspicious, basically.
Unless it turns out there's only 12 guards.
Never more than 12 on each level. At any rate, I think that her bringing in writing staff that has varying interest in writing for Star Wars is really a positive development. Now let's find out how well is she going to handle Star Wars. Although she said, hey, we're going to set this kinds of deep emotional stuff in an appropriate Star Wars context.
Absolutely.
So she's already speaking that way, but let's see, can we trust her to do Star Wars well? What is her interest in Star Wars and how long has she been interested in Star Wars? So let's go.
Long enough.
I mean, like, it was like, I was like, what I'm really interested in is Star Wars from the perspective of the bad guys. Therefore, if we set something earlier in the timeline, something before the prequels, but a little bit after, end of a High Republic, I was like, then the Jedi become, because Star Wars is always about rebels versus institutional threat, right? Underdogs versus huge empire, right? So if we set it then the Jedi become the antagonists. It's not the bad guys, but they become the bad guys to the bad guys. And
I thought that was very interesting because, like, that's all you have to be. It's just somebody's bad guy. We don't cover
Right.
that story often enough.
How about that the common phrase, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter?
Yeah. And if firefighters fight fires, what do freedom fighters fight?
That's a good question. Right. Yeah, and so and you know, you could say too, right? Are the police the good guys or the bad guys? Well, I could say probably the institution of policing is bad. And I could probably say many of the individuals that participate in that institution are bad. But it goes both ways. You could say that it's not. They're the good guys in some cases, right? Like detectives solving homicides or, you know, sexual assaults or whatever, right? You could say, oh, I'm glad that there's someone that gets paid to investigate this stuff and bring people to justice. And then you're like, well, is that a good thing though? Because our justice system is really
I was like
unjust.
kind of getting it.
So, at any rate, there's a lot of stuff too. So she's established now in that clip. There's another clip of the red carpet, right?
It kind of disappeared in between now and then. I don't see it anymore. Did you want to keep going with that interview?
No, there's a very specific. Oh, you know what? It's on a different clip. It's on the IMDb, so it'll play after this. Let's be frank. So
okay,
let's move on to that.
Okay, gotcha.
And so you have Evelyn talking about just this kind of thing, and some people are like, "Oh my God, she's going to make the Jedi the bad guys." And I think the way she explained it, and we were just talking about, is like, see, you guys need to fucking. I get that you want to be fucking angry because Luke Skywalker was supposed to be awesome.
That's a horrible thing
to fulfill your boyhood fantasies, right? And he didn't. And that's the way they told the story. And you don't have to love it. And I'm gonna like it. And I'm gonna be also saying like the sequels fucking missed a lot of marks, and it was poorly executed. Just like I'm gonna say this main story of Mando season 3 was a really interesting story. They just executed it poorly, and it's poorly written. Right?
Like, so it sounds like what you might be saying is we have to accept mistakes were made.
I think that mistakes get made on everything. Even in Andor, there are elements of it that I'm like,
why?
You know, I mean, I have to look pretty hard to find elements of Andor that I thought missed.
Yeah.
Although, except with the exception of, yes, potentially trying to tighten up some of the dialogue and human drama stuff that you seem to hate or love, but also hate.
No, okay. I only
like it when there's dragons, not zombies.
No. I don't
or
hate
the zombies have to be ice zombies.
Human drama. I just hate when it is disguised. And in the Game of Thrones, they didn't disguise it. They were like, this is fucking human drama. There's no, like, the backdrop is war. War is constant. In Game of Thrones, they were like, here's the human drama. Ooh, zombies. And it's like, no, everybody would know that. Everybody would be aware of zombies and ready to, like, deal with it. And instead, you know, we got a show that was kind of supposed to be about zombies, but not really. And it's like, pick a lane. You know, Game of Thrones was just like, oh yeah, this is a game about human drama. And in the backdrop, there are these fantasy elements. But it was more along the lines of just like, there be zombies, and we're going to talk about human drama in the background. It was kind of reversed, you know, like the human drama just kind of got thrust at you, and you're like, where does this fit in? And why would anyone give a shit about any of this in an actual apocalyptic setting?
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
The Empire and Timothy Zahn's books, and you know, like I was like kind of getting into it a little bit more as a teenager. I kind of put it down, you know, as the prequels. I just didn't feel like I was the audience for the prequels, except that I was a Star Wars fan. So I was like, yay, great, the prequels. But it was really in the advent of YouTube that I started to get reinvested in Star Wars again, and kind of realized, oh my gosh, there's this whole other world going on that I didn't realize. Like, and that's how I got introduced to Clone Wars and Dave Filoni, and like, you know, started to consume the comics and started to consume the video games in a way that I hadn't when I was younger. And I just got more into it in a way that I hadn't when I was running around my 20s, as documented the Bachelorette. Like, you know,
I'm not gonna lie. I saw you totally different when you were like, these are my experiences. I was like, Bachelorette is dark.
Yeah, I was like, that was going on, you know, and
You know, funny enough, this is how we had our early shows formatted.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Over the middle like
corners
that?
were yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
But there was something about the user engagement and the fandom that I got really invested in, and I really love consuming. And so that was kind of, the fandom was kind of actually my way back into Star Wars, to be honest. Like,
so what she's saying there, which is kind of hard to hear, and apologies.
Yeah,
that's a really great interview. They touch on a lot of stuff. Both of them, I think the podcaster, does kind of a lot of kind of like very young, like Zoomer, I think. But does a lot of pop culture stuff from a kind of like person of color, queer perspective, right? Whatever. I mean, I think that everybody's perspective is valuable. I think that some people do it better. And I watched that interview. I thought she asked good questions. And I thought the answers really humanized Leslie Headland in a way that like all the other people on YouTube or Twitter or whatever that are talking shit about her and the Acolyte and saying it's going to be garbage because like, how dare you bring who you are into your art and your work. Right. And so I think that interview was really good because like for me, I'm like, that's what I want to know. Like, this isn't just a fucking machine, right? It's not AI writing this where they're like put in the parameters, must have, you know, gender ambiguous main character, right? Like fancy martial arts fights, right? And then AI generates garbage, right? Or probably something that is better than a human can write, honestly.
We've seen it.
We've seen it.
We're out of jobs, guys.
I thought like just that kind of casualness to the conversation really made me like, wow, you're a fucking human being. And like, kind of acknowledging, and we kind of chose this kind of small clip there, but she's kind of talking about her introduction after that end of that part where we ended. She pulls out her essential atlas, and she's like, when I wanted to tell this story, the first thing I do is said, where does it happen, and you're like, where is this, and what's happening in that place? And she's like, so this is my go-to. She like had to shuffle around for it. She's like, I knew it was here earlier. And there's like under a stack of papers or whatever. She pulls it out, her essential atlas. She's like, I start here because like there's a world that needs to be developed, that's already developed, right? It's already a place for me to tell a story. And so at any rate, she brings out the atlas and this is conversation. There you go.
That one and that one. She has multiple documents.
Hey, I was kind of into I liked the prequels because I liked Star Wars, but like where I was at my age, you know, I realized that it wasn't written for me. The prequels weren't for me, and I liked them well enough, but I wasn't really great. And then I kind of was in my early 20s, and I really wasn't paying attention to Star Wars, right? Which is the opposite for me. I wasn't really paying attention, and I saw the prequels and the original trilogy re-release that preceded the prequels in the mid to late 90s. And I saw all those, and that was my real first exposure to Star Wars. But I really didn't get into it until I was in my early 20s when we started playing role-playing games.
Right.
And that's really when I was like, oh my God. And that's how I conceive of it too, is like, I mean, I was like, this is cool. This is cool. And then when I started playing and reading like expanded universe, some novels, but mostly just like role-playing supplements and stuff. And I was like, God damn, there's this like rich world to tell stories in.
That what a world to put yourself in. Yeah. And that's where it really gets to be fun. Like, it's too hard to, you know, put yourself in a story where the world is perfect. It's nice to have a flawed universe in which to exist.
Yeah, and I think that all the stories kind of like the storytellers that produced like adventure modules and all that shit, or even just the adventure ideas that were in the journals, the adventure journals, like monthly publication or whatever that existed for a short period of time. And they just write really kind of short blurbs. They might like write 2 or 3 pages of story and give you like a good villain and a good background and a good way to like incorporate this story into the bigger story you're telling. And it was fantastic. And that's really when I did the deep dive. But anyway, Headland says, oh, okay. My early 20s, I really didn't give a fuck. And then like YouTube came around and like I realized that there was this huge fan community and there was like other people existing in the space and talking about the space and like built world building and storytelling within the space. And that's when she came, Dave Filoni in the Clone Wars, right? Like, and all this stuff. So I thought it was really interesting that she's like, it's kind of really the fans that like kept me interested in this as a storytelling space. And anyway, then she's going to talk a little bit more about her cred, her receipts, so to speak, when it comes to having the firm found grounding in Star Wars as a storytelling universe, which tells me that like we are more likely to see a really great show than whatever caricature the haters have built in their minds.
Yeah. One of the earliest videos that I saw on the internet after having like played in the Star Wars universe from the mid 90s and on was two, I think they were brothers who were doing a very choreographed fight, and like the inspiration for the fight was a letter from a guy in the Civil War to his love, and basically saying like, I might not come back, from this fight. And it was it was basically meant to be like a Jedi versus a Sith or a Sith. And so like that's the way the fandom gets you. It allows you to put yourself into it in so many different ways. And it was just these two brothers that were like, we really like watching all these lightsaber fights. We want to choreograph our own, but like give it a story that, we think is fun to tell, and, do all these, like, at the time, what was beyond the pale for lightsaber combat. It was so much like jumping around, doing weird
Are you
moves.
talking about when they did the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon kind of elements where they're like flipping back, like Neo flipping backwards and all this shit?
I think so, but it's very early on. We might be thinking of the same video. I was looking for it, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah, and dude, there is so much Star Wars. I know there's a lot of written fan fiction. There are a lot of like film students, who have used Star Wars to do treatments and to practice what they're learning about the production of visual storytelling.
Yeah, I've even heard stories of like, people who put like in college when you have time and you're a fucking, design student who's working on like video graphics, and your history teacher is like, I need a treatise on this particular thing. They're like, cool, lightsaber combat.
Yeah, and so like there's been a more recent one where they were experimenting with some stuff, and it was just like a story of a Padawan and a master in like some kind of trial where the Padawans had to fight each other. That was really good, that focused highly on the technical aspects of lightsaber fighting. And I think that was where they built it around. They said, we want it to look like realistic sword fighting. What would it look like if lightsaber fights looked realistic? And then they produced this kind of short video about it. Like they had a little like 10-minute kind of story, right?
But
it was mostly about like filming it as actual sword fighting, and it was really fascinating because they don't show that in the movies because it's not supposed to be realistic. It's supposed to be high fantasy.
Right before this, I was watching a fight between fucking Yoda and Dooku, and it's like, this is bullshit. Like, where's he swinging? What's he trying to hit?
Yeah, he's mostly defensive, but that's kind of Yoda's style as a guardian, right? At any rate, there's another one that I wanted to mention real quick. That's about
it's about a striker
ISB agent. This is on YouTube. It's a fan film, short fan film. There's actually two of them. One's kind of like Indiana Jones, where they discover like a spaceship buried in the Egyptian desert, which I thought was really kind of interesting. And there's some really kind of cool chase scenes, and they're, local warlords or whatever after them, trying to stop them from this discovery. And then they wind up, the two archaeologists find out they're having a baby, and they name him George Lucas or whatever, because this is supposed to be like George Lucas's origin story. Like he was born in Indiana Jones, like discovering Star Wars. I don't know. It was interesting though. Well done. And then another one where it's like an ISB agent rescues a little girl, and most of it is dialogue, right? And they're going through, and they're trying to keep her hidden, whatever. Or maybe it's not an ISB. Either way, it turns out by the end of it, you find out, oh, this is like young Mara Jade, and she's being trafficked to become the Emperor's hand. And it's just kind of this stuff where you take old EU concepts and people want to tell an interesting story about, there's so many fan films online. It's ridiculous. So anyway, we're in our last clip here. I think we're going to end off with IMDb.
Yes, sir.
I am so sorry to bring up fan fiction again, but you said it, and I've asked your cast about it, and they all have a sneaking suspicion that some of that fan fiction may have inspired the Acolyte, or at least snuck its way into those pages.
Here's what I'll say. I did do a couple of RPG campaigns during COVID with my friends on Zoom, and there are a couple of characters from those campaigns that may or may not be in the show. So there's a little bit of that. The fan fiction that I wrote was many, many years ago, pre-internet. So it's not quite what the kids are doing now. But I will say I was always interested in female protagonists that were leaning toward the dark side of the Force and being interested in that. I think because when I was little and I heard Ben Kenobi say Vader was seduced by the dark side.
Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force.
There was just something about that made my adolescent freak out. I was just like, why did he use that word seduce? Why did that happen? So I think that possibly some of that ended up in the show as well. That's a horrible thing to say to IMDb. Oh my God, they're gonna meme the shit out of that.
Jonas at the dark side. We have BJs.
We have cookies. And seductresses. And it's interesting too, because the Clone Wars made Asajj Ventress, who's not in the film. She only exists in the extra stuff. And they made that's her whole relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi is this kind of flirtatious sexual tension between them as they fight each other. And I'm like, if you want to bring that into a live action TV show, I'm fucking here for it. And whoever's like, oh, this isn't Star Wars. It's like, yes, it is. It's right there in the fucking Clone Wars. It's right there. Dave Filoni did it. When Filoni does it, it's okay. But some other young fucking director who's just getting into Star Wars now is not okay.
Well, mostly it's not okay because there's so many letters attached to her name. If there were no letters attached to her name, that guy would have been completely fine with it. But you throw in, 4 to 20 letters, and he's just not okay with it anymore.
I'm confused.
LGBTQ, IA, etc. is what I'm saying. Like that guy was very upset because she was the Q.
Yeah, 100%.
And not the Q that he likes. I'm sure there's a Q that he loves.
I'm sure there is a Q he likes. Yeah, but anyway, I just thought that was really fascinating because we talk about RPGs a lot and we play RPGs, and I think I was just referring to how I got into Star Wars through really genuinely became passionate about Star Wars.
It's my fault.
Through RPGs.
I'm sorry. That's all me.
It's your fault, but then I'm the super fan apparently between the two of us. Because they're like, I only want to watch feature films.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to watch the Clone Wars.
They're tedious. Bad Batch is good though. Watch that.
Yeah, we're about to start season 2 with the kids. Brooke and I watched the first half of season 2, and then we stopped. Of course, I've gotten all the spoilers, so I know what happens. But I mean, I haven't watched breakdowns, but the way that people talk in comment threads and shit, you're inevitably, if you're not, within the first few days of it being released, you're probably going to get spoilers. And I just kind of have come to accept that,
I have avoided spoilers entirely, but yeah, you're right. You are steeped in the lore.
Yeah, I'm watching videos and commenting and participating in comments. I watched out of that 3 hours and 12-minute new Darth on Kylo Ren. I was in the premiere live chat for an hour and 45 minutes, and I was like, holy shit, I need to get some work done. And so then I went and did work and came back and then was trying to watch it from where I left off. And I noticed that my timer that says how much time is left kept changing. And so I wrote in chat, I was like, fuck, is this still going? And then the creator came back and was like, yeah, this is kind of a long one. Sorry. I was like, oh no, it's great. I just walked away for 45 minutes. I came back and you're still going, holy shit. Anyway, I don't know what the point in saying that was, but, except that I participate. I'm watching live stream premieres.
Yeah.
Chat with folks and, trying to. I participate in. I got a shout out from a minor channel, Cantina Club, because they liked my comments. They do polls and stuff on YouTube polls, and I occasionally jump in a poll and answer it and give a justification, and they were like, "Oh yeah, your reasoning is we liked it, so we're gonna talk about it." So yeah, I participate in as a fan in the fan community, I guess. And so I'm gonna get fucking spoilers.
Yeah. Well, I haven't been active ever since I lost the Never Tell Me the Odds, live play group. They rolled themselves into the something 20 roll 20 or something like that, group on YouTube, and shortly afterwards they just disappeared, and I was like, man, I really love that show. It was one of the fun ones that got me to looking at things. Great. Yeah. It really, it kept me active and looking, and oh, I don't recognize that reference. Let me look, what they're talking about. Oh, cool. But ever since then, there was Hyper RPG. It did a bit of Star Wars stuff, but it was so disconnected that it didn't, provoke, looking into the larger lore the way that the other, Never Tell Me the Odds did.
Yeah, and you can find several people running various campaigns. I was actually introduced to Eckhart's Ladder through an RPG campaign where a few Star Wars YouTube creators got together and ran a campaign. Mm-hmm. And really fucking entertaining. I was mostly watching other people play RPGs. For me as a player and as a game master to better understand how to use the dice and how to I can tell a decent story, but I miss a lot of the opportunities to really paint a good picture because it's all just it takes so much time to make visual aids and shit. I never do it. I just try and do it with words.
I think we all have the imposter syndrome when it comes to game mastering. It's just I feel like I did a good job, but did I really? Or was everyone just kind of
Well, I mean, I try to move a story along fairly quickly. I don't like to get bogged down in bullshit. In terms of progressing a story forward. And I think that you provide elements. I'm able to provide elements off the cuff, just kind of thinking about the space. Okay, cool. In the moment, if somebody says I want to do this, I have an idea of how to do that. But as far as especially the way that was this Dave Crennan?
Yeah, David Crennan,
America's GM. Yeah. The way that he visually described the places they are, I find to be A+. I've never been able to you walk in and I really I do sights and sounds. I watch Guy from How to Be a Great GM. And he's always got a location, just list your senses. It's a matrix. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? Blah, 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 right? And I try to do that, but in the heat of actually playing, it's actually really difficult to manage what's going on, and also with crosstalk and other kinds of other things, and characters doing random things. It's really hard to stay on track with that. I think it should be more like a regular video game RPG where you walk into the space and then there's this kind of cut scene where you kind of get to know the space and then you interact in it.
Yeah, dude, I've been and that's hard to do because you'll run into a real RPG group is so much more different than doing an RPG game. Because you have different players wanting different things and you're trying to satisfy them all at once. You would absolutely run into players that are just please tell me all about the interior of this cantina for 20 minutes because I'm fascinated. I'm going to retain every bit of it and take notes and use it to escape later on. And then you have other people that are okay, cool. Where's the guy with the question mark above his head? So I can
get my quest.
I can get my quest and go on. And that is the real challenge. And it always has been, even before the guy with the arrow above his head existed. The challenge has always been trying to engage people that, just want to have the story handed to them and interact. And that's the thing. I think we dunk on people like that too often, we're just they just want the story handed to them. And it's yeah, but a lot of times when it comes down to them interacting with NPCs, you give them a little and they give you a lot. Like, you just tell them like, oh yeah, this person is like this, and they're like, cool, I'm gonna interact in a much more in-depth way than you even gave me. And you're like, fuck, game on, dude. Like, I'm gonna play this character. And that's how you end up with like intricate characters that exist throughout stories, like Slightly Less Than Saying Larry. Like, you end up with characters that are known in all of your little things and often transgress various genres and players and game masters. Even you end up with just a fun little inside joke from all that.
Yeah, an inside joke that almost becomes a story element, and that's what was great about West End Games, and then RPG.
Plaid O'Keefe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Like, Plaid O'Keefe was this famous smuggler character that just showed up in one of the little, like, quarterly storybooks.
As a narrator, essentially.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they wanted to present the content in a way that felt like a story in and of itself. And that's what
it
really
drew you into the galaxy. Yeah. Plaid O'Keefe was excellent for drawing you into the story.
Yeah, because it would be like, okay, here's who I am, a little introduction, and I'm going to talk about all the shadow ports that like you might find in the galaxy, because I'm an expert, because I've been a smuggler and I've been to all these places, and then it's like, here's people I met, and like then there might be a little blurb where Plaid O'Keefe's reminding you like, hey, like these people are dangerous for this reason, like but it's just a hey, we want to like provide shadow ports as location ideas for the game master or for the story, and we're going to do that by having a central narration by a character that was completely didn't exist before, but is now someone who not only we've used to narrate several books, right, supplemental books, but also that like we have incorporated as a character, as an NPC into different campaigns.
Yeah.
It's great. I love it. At any rate, so just to sum up real quick, we talked about the Acolyte. I'm really excited. I was 100% correct about Andor. It was the only show that was announced that I was excited about. A lot of people were really hesitant, really kind of not excited, didn't understand why it was even being done. And it was done so goddamn well that I think universally, there's always the people in the comments thread that are like, it was boring, but don't say anything else about why. Right. But the vast majority, by like 95%, 90% of all commentary is like, oh my fucking God, this show was so good. And I don't think the Acolyte might meet that. I think the Rebellion era offers a lot of, and a kind of basing a show around like insurgency and rebellion is a considerably easier to draw people into political conflict than a mystery thriller. But I do trust her, and she doesn't have as much credits as Gilroy. She hasn't been in the game as long as Gilroy. Clearly, she's considerably younger.
I will be interested.
Go ahead.
She's 42. She's 42. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, so she's older than us. I thought she was younger than us.
No, she's my age. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I'll be interested to see like where it's going. Like, mystery can sustain itself. Like, it draws to question: will it be an episodic mystery where we get kind of used to the cadence of mystery solution, mystery, and we get super excited, near the end of the season. Is this the end of the season cliffhanger, or are we just being, taunted? Like, that sort of thing can be, interesting when it comes to a mystery and a thriller.
Yeah, I want to say that the whole, I think there's not like seasons. I think it's a one-off kind of self-contained. I don't think they've announced how many episodes, but I could totally see that being a good model, as Lucasfilm has like 8 episode seasons for their various kind of like Marvel-esque part of what they're doing, and then doing kind of this more Andor Acolyte innovative approach where they give a little bit more creative freedom, and they go into like other kind of really other spaces, storytelling spaces that aren't common, right? And then doing those in 12 episode, like 12 45-minute or 1 hour episodes or whatever.
Right.
And I would be 100% happy with that. Even in Andor has a season 2 because they pitched it to be 2 seasons broken down in a particular way. So I think that's good. Acolyte, if they
I think they did a good job because I wasn't expecting a season 2 of Andor. So
Andor,
kudos.
before they even started filming season 1, was already going to be 2 seasons.
Oh, I didn't know.
Because they pitched it originally, they were thinking 5, and then after having a discussion between the writers and the actors and everybody, they all agreed like 5 years or 5 seasons is 10 years of our life.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that in us. Let's take the 4 latter seasons that they had story treatments of, and they condensed that down. And so season 2 of Andor is going to be 3 episode arcs. It's going to be 4 3-episode arcs, each arc representing an event that took place in one of the years leading up. So 5 years ABY or BBY for the first season, and then the next will be 4. The next arc will be 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, and the last arc, it literally like ends, as far as I understand, ends with Cassian leaving to go to the Rings of Kafrene, which is the second scene, I guess, because the first scene is when Krennic comes and takes Galen Erso. But the first scene with Cassian, where he goes and he fucking gets the information about the pilot that defected and then has to shoot the guy because he came with a broken leg or a broken arm, and they have to climb to get out because the fucking stormtroopers are closing in or whatever.
Right.
And so that's on the Rings of Kafrene. So like the Andor season 2 will end, my understanding is, with Cassian going to the Rings of Kafrene or departing for. And so it's literally like the same fucking day or whatever that Rogue One.
Yeah.
But then you're going to have, and the actors are all like, oh, like it's kind of interesting because like we have events that affect who we are and how we do things. But since there's a time jump between every arc, like it's really kind of interesting how quickly they're working with their characters, like changing due to things. And Gilroy does the dialogue so well, I have no doubt that it'll be seamless because anything that you might have missed between those two things with those characters, anything important is going to be discussed on camera,
Right.
And that
hopefully,
go ahead.
I was gonna say hopefully in a way that isn't like too expository.
I don't think so. I don't think that Gilroy had any exposition.
No, I didn't notice it. So
Andor,
yeah,
season 1. Yeah,
I didn't notice it.
Yeah, I mean, unlike the sequel trilogy, which one of the complaints that I've heard recently is that like the real tension there was that all of this really fucking important shit for the world that we already understood that had already been built, a lot of changes happened off screen and they were never explained.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's true.
Han and Leia, they got married. They boned. They had a kid.
But then
that kid's fucking 20 something.
Yeah, and then they divorced.
Yeah.
All
off screen. Yeah.
So anyway, we talked about the Acolyte. We talked about Leslie Headland as a human being. We talked about her interest in Star Wars and why I believe she's competent. She has enough of a foundation. If she's playing fucking Star Wars RPGs with her friends,
as much of a foundation as I have.
What's that?
As much of a foundation as I have.
Right. And if she has a foundation that brings her to play role-playing games, that's a better foundation than fucking
a lot of writers.
Gilroy.
Yeah.
And Gilroy wrote what's arguably the best thing ever to happen to Star Wars ever. Like I would agree with people who are like, well, the original trilogy has a special place, but like in terms of storytelling, like
amateur hour.
Yeah, the original trilogy was more, again, George Lucas was more concerned with innovating filmmaking than making good films.
Yeah. That's fair.
And it's great. And he gave us an amazing universe to play with, right? And not just him, but all of those EU authors that wrote the role-playing game supplements, that wrote the novels, wrote comic books, all those. That's what's beautiful about it. It's a collective. Star Wars is it's a sandbox. It's a collective environment for telling stories that has been shaped by dozens, if not hundreds of people over the years. So I look forward to her contribution. I think that her perspective, people are like, oh, concerned. Blah. I think it's that she just starts from a genuinely a genuine curiosity of like, what if we told a story through the eyes of a female Darksider?
Wait. A female
A female.
is what you're saying? No, I immediately don't like it. That's not what I am, and I disagree.
But like I
Because
said,
I've been in a
she's
dominant
like, I
societal
was intrigued
position.
by the use of the word seduced, right?
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, God, this is going to be weird. You have gender non-binary people like seducing other people, and it's going to have all this awkward kind of queer sexual tension. I don't give a fuck.
No, well,
I
not
honestly,
only that,
I'd be
not only
interested
that,
to see how that plays out.
but like think about what Obi-Wan was talking about. He was talking about
Seduced
basically
by power.
Palpatine. Yeah, well, no, that, but Palpatine being like, "Hey, it sure would be a shame if your wife died. Come over to the dark side. We can save her."
Right, but
Like,
then, like I
that's
said,
seduction itself.
yeah, Asajj Ventress in the Obi-Wan stuff.
Well, she was just straight seducing them.
I mean, yeah, she was fucking, but also a
She wanted that JD.
villain-ish kind of, but then misunderstood, right? Because most of her story, I mean, God, the Clone Wars is good. Her as a character was very well developed.
Well, and before they were called the Night Sisters, they were the Night Witches.
Yeah, which is
what do we associate with witches? Yeah, like
witches
seductiveness. Pulling everyone away from the good and righteous path over to the orgy path.
Sarah Jessica Parker was your favorite, wasn't she? In Hocus Pocus.
I mean, if I had a choice, the other two, yes, she was.
Witches get stitches. No, witches with britches.
Witches don't
in
wear
your
britches.
britches.
There we go.
All right, yeah, but I'm genuinely excited. I think she has an interesting perspective. She has enough foundation in Star Wars. I think, yes, she hired some writers that have never really been into Star Wars, and I'm okay with that because she's going to write a mystery thriller that has a lot of fucking action, like martial arts fucking action.
Ooh, that shit.
And we haven't seen any mystery. I mean, the most mystery thriller we got was the most hated episode of Mando season 3. Or that one little tiny piece of Attack of the Clones that we were talking about. That was like one of the parts that sticks in my head is when fucking they have to chase down the assassin and then figure out who, how the assassin got assassinated. And yeah,
who killed this assassin? Why would they have killed the assassin? Yeah. They definitely tried to cram it in and failed.
Yeah, and I genuinely think that, like, people give her too hard of a time, and I think people
it's meant to be
their
fun.
Frustration on Kathleen Kennedy, and then therefore by extension her, they won't even give her a chance because she says Kathleen is great, and they're like, oh, you're a fucking sycophant, you're gonna wokeify fucking Star Wars or whatever. And the reality is that she spent years developing this project, and when the president of the company is supportive of your project, that should be a good thing because it means you're going to get the resources you need, right?
Oh.
And another point too is that, like, they're like, oh my God, like, this Kathleen Kennedy's pet project, but other people are not happy with the project. And when Headland was asked about that, she's like, I'm essentially coming into this with the Jedi framed in the story as kind of not the good guys.
But I think anyone who's followed
pushback against that. Sorry, go ahead.
Which is ridiculous because I think anyone who's followed Star Wars for a long time can see all the cracks in the veneer that the Jedi have to offer. You can see you named the librarian being, super, like, well, the Jedi are infallible. If there's something missing, it doesn't exist. And it's like, that's absolutely.
Or Mace Windu in the Phantom Menace. No, there's no way the Sith could have come back without us knowing.
Yeah, we're
that's
so
what
powerful.
She's kind of getting at is that this is towards the end of the High Republic, and it's kind of showing it's going to portray the story is viewed from the side that we typically view as the villains.
Yeah.
And so then it's going to be kind of critical, introspective at the Jedi during this period, right when they're reaching the height of their arrogance. And they literally allowed, like, a Sith Lord to fucking seize control of the galactic apparatus literally right under their fucking noses. They talk to the guy every fucking day.
You know what it was? It's because not all the Jedi had noses. We should really kick out all the Jedi that don't have noses.
Yeah, if you don't have noses. All right. Anyway, thanks for sticking with us. That was over 2 hours. We haven't done a stream over 2 hours in a very long time.
Almost 2.5, sir.
Well, I know that it's been too long and I gotta go pick up my kids, even though it's not my day, because that's my life.
Ooh, it's your turn to have to go.
Well, it's not my day to pick up kids, but I also, when their mom's like, hey, I'm not gonna be back from my business meeting in time, can you get them? I'm usually like, sure.
When kids get picked up, they get picked up.
It's true.
With thunderous applause.
Oh yeah. I look forward to it, man. This has been With Thunderous Applause, a podcast where two friends talk about the events and ideas that'll shape our uncertain future. And today we took a break from talking about doom and gloom and nuclear Armageddon, imminent nuclear Armageddon, to talk a little bit about an upcoming show that I hope I get to see. I hope the world still exists in 2024 so that I can watch this show. And
nice.
My greatest hope is A, that it delivers, and B, that it delivers in such a way that all the fucking haters have to eat crow, because
when liberty dies,
because
dies?
People are fucking stupid. And yes,
With
they cheer
stupid
for the death of Star Wars.
Rick and Two Crows? I don't know.
Not Rick and Two Crows. Although I liked Rick and Two Crows. The best part of that one is where he spun a wheel. He's like, two crows, it's better than a Morty.
I think the best part was when the crows were making out with his mortal enemy.
And it turns they were traitors all along.
Yeah.
He's all disappointed.
Yeah. Never rely on two crows. Too. Yeah.
Where he has them like fly around and then just rips everybody's heads off.
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been With Thunderous Applause. And have a good day.
Yeah. Thunderous Applause.
Thunderous Applause.
We'll cop a bit. Yeah.
All right. Take it easy, man. Peace.
Bye.